discover under your cover the strangest thing that I ever heard of. It makes you wonder why you're here and why you feel so strangely weird.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was live, not quite at the Royal Albert Hall, British Sea Power and some tortoises as well and various other things. Welcome to Cosmic Shambles presents Sea Shambles, a very special night at the Royal Albert Hall. What is your Royal Albert Hall like? My Royal Albert Hall, if you've not seen it before, this is my, oh, that's my teddy bear there as well. That is my Royal Albert Hall for the evening. For those of you who don't know, who've joined us this evening, we were genuinely, this was the show that we were going to, not like this. I mean, a very different show. I'd have worn an even snazzier jacket than this scientifically peer-reviewed corduroy. But we decided, rather than some of the artists who in the last week have been complaining about having their Albert Hall run cancelled due to the current situation, we thought, to hell with the fact that we can't do it at the Albert Hall, we are going to put on a show on. So tonight it's all about the sea, it's about the oceans, it's about the mystery of the oceans, it is about what we know, what we are yet to find out. Obviously, that's one of the hardest things, what we're yet to find out, because we don't necessarily know what we're yet to find out. But we'll be dealing with that enigmatic thing later on with Helen Czerski, who I'll be introducing any moment now. And also to mention some of the people we've got on tonight. Very soon we're going to be joined by Steve Backshall, who we've been sent some really wonderful questions about the strangeness of some of the creatures that live in the oceans, like the great line that Richard Feynman said, that the imagination of nature is far greater than the imagination of human beings. And I think that is very, very true, especially when you look inside the oceans and you see what mutation, heredity and natural selection leads to. We have Chris Hadfield 3 times on the International Space Station, took some of the most remarkable pictures of the planet Earth while he was in that vantage point. We're going to be talking about some of those images that he's seen. We have more from British Sea Power. We have Lemn Sissay. We have an all-star reading of Moby Dick. We have Brian Cox talking about, about something that happened with him and an octopus, but I'm not going to tell you any more now. You'll have to stay watching to find out about Brian Cox and that octopus. But I'm now going to introduce my co-host for this evening. Helen Czerski, how are you, Helen?
I am very well, and I am also not in the Royal Albert Hall. I do have a thresher shark behind me and a bait ball, but that's as close as I can get. But I want to say, we're talking about the ocean tonight, and I think a lot of people forget how important the ocean is to how planet Earth works. It's this spherical shell, but it's not just a pond that's sitting there. It is an engine. And I think the problem with looking at the ocean is that sometimes it's a bit like, we humans, we look at a map of a city, and it's like looking at the edge of a city on the map and saying, oh, I know where that city is, and therefore I know everything about it. And there's so much more going on inside the ocean. And I think it's time that we started to appreciate it. The ocean has geography, it's got mountain ranges and plains, it's basically got anatomy and physiology, it's all connected together, and that is the canvas on which life is written. And the great thing about the ocean is that it's a place where physics and chemistry and biology are all woven together. This spherical shell of an engine is one enormous system, and the life and the physics and the chemistry aren't separate, and it's such an amazing place. So this is why I study the ocean, and it's why we're having a whole evening to bring you not just the science of the ocean, but the history and the culture and all the ways that it's touched human life. And we're supporting some ocean charities. That's very important. So just below you on the screen, you will see there is a scrolling line that has the ocean charities we're supporting. So if you were going to come, or you bought a ticket, you got a refund, or if you are just joining us, do please consider making a donation. Buy a virtual ticket. And the charities are Bite Back, Surfers Against Sewage, Oceana, and then of course there's the Cosmic Shambles Stay at Home Festival and the Royal Albert Hall. So if you would like to support any of those things, then please do that.
And we should say that despite the balance, we are not giving any money to Surfers for Sewage, which is a very different charity. I have no idea what drives them to have that particular inclination, but it's probably something Freudian, I would imagine. I want to just quickly, before we introduce our first performer, I wanted, or first scientist really, this thing that I find most fascinating, the first time on Infinite Monkey Cage, when we did a show all about the ocean, that 80% of the ocean is unknown, that we know far more about the moon than we know about the oceans on this planet. And I think, again, that adds such a level of excitement from a scientific perspective, where very often we're always talking about, the excitement, as we did last time, 2 years ago when we did Space Shambles, of course, the fascination with reaching out and going further beyond our planet. But the fact that so much of our planet remains mysterious, the fact that there are living things that we still, I presume, know nothing about whatsoever.
And the great thing about this actually is that it really goes to the heart of what we think of as exploration, because there's been this tradition of saying explorations, we go there, we stick a flag in it, and then we know everything we need to know about it. And actually, exploration of the ocean is much more about exploration of understanding. It's not just enough to go there. It's sitting in the middle of this three-dimensional dynamic system and understanding everything that's happening around you. So even though you could say that the oceans are unexplored by the going there, sticking a flag in it thing, the really interesting thing, the new exploration in the ocean is what they're doing and how complex and beautiful it all is.
Well, we're going to have our first guest for this evening. I think I haven't seen him since possibly Hammersmith, or it might have been when we did one of our Compendium of Reasons there, or it might have even been on the Infinite Monkey Cage. And this is one of my favourite guests because he does, like many people, he does all the things that I would not dare to do. I think one of the first times I saw him was when my son was about 5 or 6 years old, and he watched this guest with a taipan snake, I think, explaining how, as long as you remember how long the snake is, you are able to, because you know the striking distance. And that's one of those many moments where I realise my own shortcomings when it comes to interactions with taipan snakes. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to he's got the best Albert Hall so far. I've got to say, it's a very impressive Albert Hall. Welcome, Steve Backshall. Hello, Steve Backshall. Hello, Steve.
Ta-da! This isn't bad, is it?
This is fantastic. I did not know there was so much money in sometimes overly friendly towards highly poisonous snakes.
This is the Thames. This is the Thames, Robin. Seriously, this I have never seen the Thames looking like this before. It's like it's been given a little bit of a time in the sun, and now all of a sudden it's flat calm all the time. It is clear. You can see to the bottom. The bugs are absolutely loving it.
Oh, so you are also covered. One of your arms, at least, is now covered in midge bites, is it?
Well, it's more than anything. It's the bugs that spend the majority of their lives underwater, particularly the mayflies. the mayfly emergence this year has been the most spectacular I have ever seen. And the caddisflies are just in these giant clouds. And because of that, you get the swifts and the swallows and the hobbies, the martins, even the blue tits are flying along the length of our houseboat and picking the mayflies out of the spider webs. It's set rip this massive explosion of life here.
So as a lot, around the world, you've taken us to so many fascinating places over the years. But have you found this strange period, this lockdown period, the fact you are now focusing on such a small area, and looking at a lot of the kind of animals that normally would not be highlighted by TV shows? You would see them on Spring Watch and things like that. But overall, I'm just thinking how that focus must be fascinating to you.
It really is. I think being able to have much that it's like some kind of crazy bingo. But when it comes to wildlife, this is a time that we just will never probably experience again, a time when there are no motorized craft going down the river at all. And because of that, all of the birds that nest down at river level, the grebes, the coots, the ducks, are having an absolute field day. And being able to watch that happening for I would imagine the only time in my life has been actually the one saving grace from this whole crazy period of time.
Yeah, I found it fascinating. There's a little bit of a canal near where I am, and when I go for my kind of evening walk with my son, and we just watch where all the midges are, and as you watch the fish just pop up, and the beautiful there, as you just see there, those small waves, it's just fascinating to watch. And I think that's something we should say to everyone who's watching, and I know it's a very, very difficult time for people, but try if you can get that focus on those small areas, if you can find that certain corner of nature, and I know not everyone has that access, but wherever you can, even a window box, whatever it might be, watching those things, I think is very good for us as well. It's very good ultimately for in what can seem like an insane time.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, Helen.
Well, we've got some questions that we've had sent in by kids, and it would be great to get started on those, because actually one of them is very relevant to the water we can see behind you, because of course the fish that are feeding on the mayflies just behind you are freshwater fish. And Liam, age 9, sent us a question for you, which is, could a saltwater fish like the ones in the ocean survive in freshwater like a lake?
I am going to answer your question, Helen, but I just have to move the camera because cruising behind me. Can you see that? Is that showing up on camera?
Yeah, we
just, yeah.
What are they?
That is a mallard with 9 ducklings, and she's had them for the best part of 2 weeks. By now, if we were in business as normal with loads of motorized boats going up and down here, I would expect her to be down to 3 or 4. She's got 9. Hasn't lost a single one. That is really, really unusual. Anyway, back to your question. The question about being able to move from freshwater to saltwater habitats. There are some fish that can do it. Notably, the bull shark is able to penetrate way inland, several thousand miles inland when it's traveling up the Amazon. In order to do that, to play with its own biology and with its own osmotic balances, so as basically not to dry out in either environment. And it takes a lot of adaptations, and because of that, there are relatively few fish that do it. There are the you can probably help me out with this. Is it anadromous? Is that the name of the fish?
It's one of those words that every time I see it, I have to spell it in my head. But yes,
so fish like some kind of like salmon that spawn in fresh water and then spend much of their out at sea. There are those, but ones that move backwards and forwards from freshwater to saltwater environments are comparatively rare.
Well, one of the things I love about the salmon is that, as you just said, they make their adaptations, but they basically run their pumps backwards. So when they're in freshwater, every cell in a salmon is trying to pump salt into cells to keep them balanced, and when they go out in the sea, there's too much salt and the pumps have to turn around and pump the other way, and so they basically turn their cellular machinery upside down so that salt, they're trying to keep the salt out instead of bringing it in. And it's those little biological details that it sounds very simple, because we can go for a swim in the sea or a swim in the lake and it's pretty much the same, but for a fish that is a really big deal. So amazing.
looking down at the water here, looking down at a freshwater ecosystem as opposed to a saltwater ecosystem, the water appears from the surface to be absolutely identical, but it's not. And the challenges of both different environments are massive, which is why so few animals, most animals will tend to stay in either marine environments or freshwater environments.
Right, we've got a question from Gemma now, and this is a great question. This is one of my son's favourite facts is the fact there's an episode of Peppa Pig which is banned in Australia because it says "be nice to spiders," and obviously, so this is this question from Gemma is why do some places like Australia have more deadly animals than other places like England?
Well, the first and the most important thing to actually get across straight away is that deadly, which has been my kind of, I guess, my mantra for life, is all about animals that are deadly in their world to other animals, not dangerous to us as human beings. So Australia, with all its animals that are extraordinarily venomous, actually has incredibly few fatalities from contact with animals. But yeah, it does kind of seem like they've got all of the world's most nasty creatures, the world's most venomous snake, most venomous spider, most venomous octopus, most venomous snail. But their interactions with people are, generally speaking, benign. And a tremendous amount of that, actually, I think, is down to the fact that most Australian people really love their wildlife and really respect their wildlife. And they learn the rules. They learn, that if you live in Queensland, there are certain times a year you can't go in the sea because box jellyfish are there, and that's a bad thing. And people learn that and understand that. And here in this country, people go absolutely insane if they're told that we might have false widow spiders that might be able to give you a little bit of a nip, because we've lost that connection to wildlife, and we've lost that desire to understand how it functions. In terms of why there are so many extraordinarily venomous species situated in one place, it's probably down to biogeography, the fact that Australia has been, for long periods of time in the past, completely isolated from much of the rest of the world. And in isolation, sometimes evolution can just go absolutely nuts. Certainly the world's most venomous snake, the inland taipan, has just pure and simple evolved from having a very unique setup where it needs to bring down its prey incredibly quickly, but it happens to be prey that has sharp teeth and big claws and can do the snake damage. So it needs to be able to strike and release and have its venom take effect super quickly. And over deep time, through a classic biological arms race, it's just become more and more toxic over time.
Well, that maybe leads on to a question we had, I think that's how it's said, which is, were you scared the first time you swam with a shark? Because you've swum with a lot of sharks.
I have, but the first time, of course I was. It was totally by accident. I was probably 11 or 12 years old. I was on holiday with my parents, and I was out snorkeling, and I can remember seeing this shark swimming round and around me, and to begin with thinking, oh my goodness, this is great, and then after a while getting terrified, climbing up onto a rock and sitting there until I got weapons grade sunburn, and eventually got back into the water and swam faster than I ever have in my entire life to get back to the shore. Now I know that was a black tip reef shark. It was probably about that big, and less danger to me as a human being than probably a halibut. But it's a question of perception, isn't it? And I think that's one of the important things that we deal with is the animals we think are dangerous. Just because we perceive them as being dangerous, don't mean that's so.
Chloe has a wonderful question, which this is a book I might read from later on, which is a beautiful book by the poet Heathcote Williams, Whale Nation, and it is amusing over the majesty and the beauty of the whale. And Chloe, age 7, she would like to know, how did whales get so big? And I mean, their story is such a fascinating evolutionary story, isn't it? The evolution of the whale.
Yeah, absolutely, it really is. I mean, a lot of it is down to the fact that water offers support. It offers support for the skeleton and the bulk of a large animal. And so, most big creatures, whether it's the anaconda, the world's biggest snake, is a snake that lives in the water, whether it's, big crocodiles, they live in the water, whether it's a whale, living in the water offers that support for your body, which means that you can afford to get big. And then some of it is going to be down to the availability of prey. So, a lot of the very biggest animals, the blue whale, the fin whale, the sei whale, the grey whales are feeding on very, very small things that occur in enormous numbers in terms of biomass, things like krill. could be some of the most numerous creatures on the planet. And yes, you could go for several days and swim around and not get anything at all. And then you can swim through tons and tons and tons. And if you have the apparatus, which they do in the form of their baleen and their giant tongues to be able to sieve that krill from the water, you're talking about colossal amounts of protein that these animals can take in and therefore have the ability to grow very big. And growing very big offers advantages. It offers advantages which I will get Helen to explain in how you moderate your temperature, because big animals are much more effective at keeping the heat inside their body than small ones are. It offers effective protection from predators. Being big can be a good thing, and there are, because of that, many whale species that have evolved to be massive.
So the whale, though, at one point, during the evolution, what became the whale was a kind of lumbering, almost giant sloth. Look, I mean, is that the nearest we could get to imagining what it was, like a lumbering kind of giant sloth?
Well, it kind of looks like when people recreate the skeleton of these terrestrial ancestors of whales. Yeah, they do look somewhere between a ground sloth and a hippo. And if you go back through any cetacean skeleton now, you will see the remnants of the limbs that it used to move around on land with. But I mean, we don't know. We don't know exactly what they look like. I would imagine, though, it would have been something pretty bizarre.
I think we've got time for one more question. This is from Leah, and she says, after seeing your shows, her kids are always telling her that she has to get responsible fish when she goes shopping. And she said, there's so many different labels and logos. How can she know? What is the best way of knowing in terms of responsible fish?
Oh, I feel your pain. I mean, the Marine Conservation Society is kind of the gold standard, but I would say ask. Go to a supermarket that has a decent fishmonger and say to them, which one of these is the one that I can eat that is the most sustainable? But you need to keep on top of it because it's changing the whole time. Generally speaking, now in this country, things like mackerel and pollock are probably the best things that we can eat, and bluefin tuna and king crab and certain kinds of imported prawns are still probably the worst. But it changes all the time, and there are a dozen different labels you can have on fish. So go to the MCS's website, check out their blue tick system, and then just ask your fishmonger.
Can I just say how impressive it is how well this is being run by our producer Trent, because normally we have a signal to say we're overrunning, and I know we're overrunning, and he somehow managed to send a swan down a river to go behind you. So we know that we've got to wrap up. Sebastian, we're going to find out later on if fish sleep. I promise you that. Thank you so much for joining us, Steve, and thank you, Issa and Chloe and everyone else who gave us those questions. Have a wonderful night, and hopefully next year we will see you on the stage of the Albert Hall next time we do this.
Here's hoping. Really good to see you guys.
Cheers, Steve. Thank you very much. Who do we have next, Helen?
We're going to move on underwater properly now. So now anyone who's watched any of our shows will recognise lots of time playing the trumpet at our shows, directing jazz, all that kind of stuff. But he also spends a lot of time diving underwater, and so he's made a video for us. But we're going to have a chat about it first. But here is Steve Pretty, and I have to say, Steve, you have made effort here. I like the look of this.
Thank you very much. Yeah, well, I thought it's because we were planning some fairly elaborate stuff in the hall, and I sort of felt like we couldn't let this go without having a bit of a nod to that, because there was some talk about me musical directing the show from inside a tank on stage. Not like an army tank, a large water tank. It was going to be the first ever underwater MD role.
And for anyone who is thinking this sounds unlikely, he is serious.
No, I'm absolutely serious. I'm absolutely serious. I'm absolutely serious.
Talking about this.
Yeah, exactly. And so, it was all sort of being planned and planned. So I felt like I need to dress for the occasion, you know.
Well, I think no, we did when we all thought the live show was going ahead. We did go to the London School of Diving back in February. You and I and some of the musicians who play with you, and we had a lot of fun because you were trying. You had a thing, and I was skeptical, but you were going to do it anyway. Of playing the trumpet underwater. Why did you want to do that?
Well, I kind of wanted to get some samples together for the show, because I wanted to be able to reference. It was when the tank was in question. I wanted to be able to reference the sound of different instruments underwater, what that might do to the. You and I, Helen, had a chat about your kind of ideas about how it might affect the sound, and the bubble science of it, which is obviously your area of expertise. And so we just kind of got spitballing some ideas, and it seemed like a good idea to go and get some weird sounds. And as a musician, I do a lot of sampling and things, always looking for unique sounds. And I thought this surely is a chance to combine my scuba diving. I do a lot of underwater photography as well. And music, and so
it's a great opportunity as well to put a pin in that. So Jacques Cousteau, for all that he did great things for sharing the ocean, he did write a book called The Silent World, and it has bugged me for years. He, of all people, must have known that the ocean is not silent. Light doesn't travel very far underwater. Sound is how you find out what's happening underwater, and so that including the music and the way that sound travels and how all that's different underwater is a great thing to talk about. But let's move on to light, because in the piece that you have made for the show, the revised piece, it's all about light underwater. Tell me a little bit about that.
So as a diver, and particularly someone who does dive photography for some underwater magazines and things, I've always been interested in obviously light is so unique underwater. There's so many different, every time you go down, even if it's on the same site, it will look completely different. And I've always been interested in how that can be used in creative ways. And recently I've started exploring what's called fluorescence photography, and there's a lot of coral. Strangely, not all. There's not entirely. I think I'm right in saying that scientists aren't entirely sure why this happens. Always, there's a theory that it might be sunscreen, but a lot of corals fluoresce. So they have they put out a kind of they release some light when you shine a blue light on them, which is what we.
So we often see this in fish. When people have aquariums, if you've ever seen an aquarium that's got coral in it, and it's got this kind of purplish light at the top, right, and the coral looks green. What you're seeing is that the bluish purple light is hitting the coral, and the pigments in the coral are actually giving back a different colour, and that's the green colour.
Exactly. So that's really striking. If you dive like this, you have to wear a special kind of yellow barrier, yellow filter on your mask and on the camera. But it's really extraordinary feeling diving at night. Obviously, you have to do it at night, and so it's completely pitch black. But you're kind of going through this weird neon sort of underwater cityscape. And one of the things that's always appealed to me most about diving is the fact that it's an incredibly privileged position to be there. The fact that so few people in human history have had the chance to be able to see this extraordinary sight, and to be able to do that at night especially is completely different from diving in the day. And then once you add in this extra level of seeing things fluoresce, it really just feels like another planet. It feels like you don't belong there, and it's an incredibly privileged thing to witness it. But also that it's it's got that kind of interesting combination of diving in general, but certainly at night, it's got that interesting combination of kind of repetitiveness. The breathing, as you say, the sound is quite, although it's not silent, you do get into a sort of rhythm with your breathing and with the sound of the shrimps and the coral and all that sort of stuff. But also, particularly night diving, it's full of surprises, and so every time you see a coral that you've seen during the day, it's completely different at night. And there's also a sort of sense of danger, whereas these photos came from in this piece was in Egypt, was recently, and they have big lionfish there that follow you around at night. And so trying to take these photos, there's a sense that you might get stung by a lionfish at any moment.
Well, I love, and night diving, I feel, is the way when you feel the alien nature of the ocean. When there's bright light, you can kind of kid yourself. It's almost like land. You can see rocks, you can sort of see what's going on. Yeah. Whereas when you're night diving, you feel surrounded by the ocean. You feel the density of the water around you, and suddenly you realise why it is that evolution has taken all these different paths underwater, because the rules are different. If you want to live down here, you've got to live differently, and I feel very small on night dives because you can feel how big it is.
Absolutely, you get that proper sense of the sublime that you do on with all the best diving, that you're a tiny part of in this huge ocean, and that you're a kind of visitor to this world that you're not really supposed to be in. And so there's a sort of sense of it, a bit of danger, a bit of excitement, but also a sense of euphoria, particularly with the fluorescent stuff. The first couple of times I did it, I came out and it was extremely trippy. It was because there's all these kind of bright lights, and it's all you've seen for an hour or so underwater is just these sort of weird greens and blues, and then suddenly there's a poisonous lionfish swimming by your face. And so, it's really an amazing, occasionally slightly scary, but always fascinating and kind of euphoric experience. So I've tried to capture that with this piece.
So you shared that with this fluorescence. So now, with the help of other members of his band and a lot of amazing visuals, here is Fluorescence.
Right now, welcoming to the Albert Hall, well, actually his front room, but we're pretending it's a night out because he has spent, the last, like everyone else, not merely, though, has he been trapped in his house, he's also been reading every single book that may well be in the Booker Prize list. So this is his night out. Let us celebrate his night out. Let us have an enormous round of applause for Lemn Sissay. Hey, Lemn, how are you doing?
I'm good, my friend. Thank you. Yes, I'm good. And like you say, I'm reading day and night, from morning, afternoon and night.
How many books have you read so far?
I've read 92 books. 92 books so far, and I have approximately 60 to go. But it's a joy. I mean, this is my degree. This is my PhD. I'm learning so much, and there are so many brilliant writers out there. It's a total honour.
Well, we will now talk of one of the great works of not merely sea poetry, but a narrative about the sea, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. What is it about that poem that, for you, makes it such a work of art?
The Rime of the Ancient Mariner is master storytelling. It's a lesson in telling stories. We are right now in the middle of a storm, and how we tell the story of what's happening to us now won't be through politics. It won't be through newspapers even. It'll be through poets. It'll be through novelists. It'll be through singer-songwriters. So what Samuel Taylor Coleridge does in this poem is he marries nature to the spiritual. He speaks of betrayal and loss and redemption and the fact that to carry stories that I think I'm trying to say that this is a lesson in how to tell a story. Mm. That's so terrible. That's so terrible. You know, I've performed this story with Bellowhead, the folk band, on stage in front of the sea in Southend. I've performed it in at the South Bank Centre at the Queen Elizabeth Hall. I've just done it with Iggy Pop and Tilda Swinton and a whole lot of people online. There's a beautiful sort of like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, a collection of readings online at the moment that's going out while we're in lockdown. You know, it is difficult to explain.
But it is, I mean, that thing, as you said, I'm intrigued as well, was because you've performed it in different environments, with different backgrounds, with different music, with different artists. Each time you return to it, how much does the poem change for you? You know, not merely with age, but with context as well.
Well, yes. I mean, it's a poem that you could say has a sort of Christian undertone to it, for example. But I have never sort of felt the poem when reading it as a Christian text. It is just as much about the damage that we do to the environment as it is about how man can and woman can go against against truth and against their better nature. He kills the albatross, you know, the symbol to the sailors of good luck. You know, as the ship is lost in the ocean, the albatross represents the impossible. How does it get there? And he kills it, and he's hated for it. You know, in the similar way, you could say that we kill the things that matter to us, nature. Yeah, gosh, it's so difficult to speak about poetry because it's so condensed, and that's why a poet writes a poem, because it says everything within it, you know.
Yeah, No, I think you're right. I think there's we've given you a very difficult task, which is art that speaks for itself, to then try and sometimes verbalise all of that emotion that goes on during that the performance and the reading of it.
Which is what you do, by the way. Which is what you do, and stars are in this poem. You know, the fact that it begins with the sun falling down to the right. And as they change from the South Pole to the North Pole, he constantly refers to the planets, which I think is part of the romantic poetry movement of the 19th century. You know, so everything is inside this poem. It's both deeply personal. You could see it as political. It has the stars, the sea, the inside turmoil of humanity, and yeah.
Well, that's well. Let's have that excerpt from the poem that you've chosen, and let the poem speak for itself as well, with you as the translator of that work. Then, over to you.
I've started at the beginning of the poem, where the ancient mariner, and by the way, the first part of the poem is not said by the ancient mariner; it's said by the wedding guests, who the ancient mariner stops. It is an ancient mariner, and he stoppeth one of three. By thy long grey beard and glittering eye, now wherefore stoppest thou me? The bridegroom's doors are opened wide, and I am next of kin. The guests are met, the feast is set. Mayst hear the merry din. He holds him with his skinny hand. There was a ship, quoth he. Hold off, unhand me, grey-beard loon. Eftsoons his hand dropped he. He holds him with his glittering eye. The wedding guest stood still, and listens like a 3 years child. The mariner hath his will. The wedding guest sat on a stone, he cannot choose but hear, and thus spake on that ancient man, the bright-eyed mariner. The ship was cheered, the harbour cleared, merrily did we drop, below the kirk, beyond the hill, below the lighthouse top. The sun came up upon the left, out of the sea came he, and he shone bright, and on the right went down into the sea. Higher and higher every day, till over the mast at noon. The wedding guest here beat his breast, for he heard the loud bassoon. The bride hath paced into the hall, red as a rose is she. Nodding their heads before her goes the merry minstrelsy. The wedding guest, he beat his breast, yet he cannot choose but hear, and thus spake on that ancient man, the bright-eyed mariner. And now the storm blast came, and he was tyrannous and strong. He struck with his oar, taking wings, and chased us south along, with sloping masts and dipping prow, as who pursued with yell and blow, still treads the shadow of his foe, and forward bends his head. The ship drove fast, loud roared the blast, and southward we fled. And now there came both mist and snow, and it grew wondrous cold, and ice mast high came floating by, as green as emerald. And through the drifts the snowy cliffs did send a dismal sheen. Now shapes of men nor beasts we ken, the ice was all between. The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swound. At length did cross an albatross, thorough the fog it came, as if it had been a Christian soul. We hailed it in God's name. I ate the food it ne'er had eat, and round it flew. The ice did split with a thunder fit, the helmsman steered us through, and a good south wind sprung up behind. The albatross did follow, and every day for food or play came to the mariner's hollow. In mist or cloud, on mast or shroud, it perched for vespers 9, while all the night through fog smoke white glimmered the white moonshine. God save thee, ancient mariner, from the fiends that plague thee thus. Why lookest thou so? With my crossbow I shot the albatross. The sun rose up upon the right, out of the sea came he. I should have stopped, I know, Robin, and I now shall stoppeth me.
Thank you so much, Lemn. That is fantastic. And so, as well as everyone watching this now, going off after this to read Rhyme the Ancient Mariner or find some of those wonderful different versions that Lemn was talking about, please also remember that Lemn's book, My Name is Why, is a wonderful piece of work and something well worth reading during this period of lockdown. So, thank you very much, Lemn Sissay.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Thank you. Yeah.
I'll see you soon.
Love to you, man. See you. Bye-bye, Trent. Trent, thanks very much as well.
Welcome back to whatever Albert Hall you're in, and Lemn is so great. I just really love his work, and I love watching him recite poetry. And quickly mention some of the other things that are coming up. I'm very pleased to say that we have a full Albert Hall, by the way, in terms of people watching this, and it's lovely to see that quite a few of you who were going to be coming to the show are still watching this tonight as well. We were so excited about doing it, and I hope some of that is kind of coming across. We've got coming up, the thing that I'm particularly excited about is we've got a reading of Moby Dick with not the whole thing. You're fine. You're going to be finished by Monday. It's not going to be a problem. But we've got, amongst others, we have from Inside Number 9 and many other things, Reece Shearsmith, and from How I Met Your Mother, and also the Avengers movies, Cobie Smulders. They're doing a reading of Moby Dick. We have more from Steve Backshall as well. We have Brian Cox talking about that incident with an octopus. We have some more surprise musical guests, British Sea Power, Chris Hadfield, and I would mention again the tip jar at the bottom there. In the last few weeks when we've been doing live shows, we've made, I think, somewhere around £27,000 to be spread amongst kind of various charities, artistic institutions and other things as well. And also, if you can join our Patreon, that's a fantastic, we're trying, because everyone's been working on this and all the other things for free as well, and even when it's not lockdown, we try and make as much stuff as possible. If you can support us via Patreon, cosmicshambles.com at the Patreon page, then that means we can make even more ridiculous nonsense. So not all of it's ridiculous nonsense, only the bits I do in between, proper evidence-based things. And also don't forget the Albert Hall as well. You can also support the Albert Hall, which of course also has been closed, and we don't know how long any of these things are going to be closed for, so you can support the Albert Hall and check out all the other events that they're putting on as well as Royal Albert Home. I was just going to quickly, before we bring on Helen Scales, who wrote a very, very beautiful book about seahorses, I've mentioned some of the other books I was thinking of reading from tonight. One is, I've mentioned already, Whale Nation, which is such a beautiful book, and this particular copy was bought in a hospice shop in Ramsgate. From space, the planet is blue. From space, the planet is the territory, not of humans, but of the whale. Blue seas cover 7/10 of the Earth's surface and are the domain of the largest brain ever created, with a 50-million-year-old smile. Ancient unknown mammals left the land in search of food or sanctuary and walked into the water. Their arms and hands changed into water wings. Their tails turned into boomerang-shaped tail flukes, enabling them to fly almost weightless through the oceans. Their hind legs disappeared, buried deep within their flanks, free from land-based pressures. Very, very beautiful book. I was also thinking of reading from this, Communication Between Man and Dolphin. This is the best book in the Communication Between Man and Dolphin series. Very fascinating man called John C. Lilly, and also Margaret House did research in seeing if we could properly communicate, possibly with the English language, with dolphins. I have to admit, it turns out it was this during the 60s and 70s period of research, so LSD was involved. And then I thought, but what is the most important book about the sea? And I realised that in some ways it was an estuary-based book, and it was Guy Smith's series of giant killer crabs books. Now, it's very important to tell you that much like Robert Benchley's Jaws book, Robert Benchley went on to have some regrets and do a lot of work to try and highlight the fact that the image he had given of sharks is not, we don't need to be scared, be careful, be cautious, but the fear of sharks he instilled in people was not really the true worry of sharks, and he did a lot of work for that. In the same way, the Giant Killer Crabs books, to be fair, the Giant Killer Crab is a lot smaller than you might imagine, but not in Guy and Smith's brilliant books. For those who don't know, there's a lot in the series. Obviously, there's crabs on the rampage, and they really are there. You can see that's a very angry crab, and it has no, in terms of law, it has no respect for property either. There's a sign saying private, no fishing. That giant crab doesn't care. That's the origin of the crabs. That's before they started going on kind of territory with keep out signs. But Crab's Moon is perhaps the most insulting, especially to royalty. And I should be careful, as we are officially at the Royal Albert Hall, because in this one, a really giant crab, Crab's Moon, is actually attacking one of the Queen's post boxes there. So this, I'll just give you a brief, tiny bit. I was going to do a long one, but we're nearly out of time for this. I just love these books. They are such a delight. If you are looking for a giant killer crab rampage book, this is everything you would hope for. Suddenly, a chilling sound broke the uneasy silence. A bestial cry of pain that was cut off almost as soon as it had begun. Then it came again in unison, much louder. Terrified braying, the drumming of hooves, a melee somewhere. Click, click, clickety click. The two humans froze in their posture of sexual congress. The sheer terror of the unknown numbed their brains. Creatures galloped wildly, screamed, fell and struggled, and on the faint sea breeze was borne the stench of rotting marine vegetation, as though centuries of decaying seaweed had been dragged ashore. Clickety click. Crabs, crabs, crabs the size of beach donkeys. Anyway, so there we go. That's just a little tiny bit of filler about giant killer crabs. They are wonderful books. Guy Smith, Robin Hitchcock is a great fan of those. Musician Robin Hitchcock, and was once given by Guy Smith a giant killer crab based clock, and went on to say that it wasn't that effective as a clock because the hands were actually pincers, so it was very, very hard to tell what hour it was when looking at the clock. This brings us, without any form of segue whatsoever, into the world of Helen Scales. I said that the first book of hers that I read was a beautiful book that was all about the seahorse. And the seahorse, because when you look at images of seahorses and just, again, see what appears to us to be such an unlikely thing. And that's a very important thing when we look at life, mutation, heredity, natural selection, is sometimes if you just stare at it long enough, you think how unlikely it is that such a myriad of different shapes and forms exist on a planet. Helen Scales is always looking at these beautiful ideas. Please welcome to your stage, probably to her front room, I'm not entirely sure. Please welcome to whatever your Albert Hall is, Helen Scales.
Hello. I'm going to tell you a story about what happened when I did some deep sea research and I helped to sink some dead alligators into the abyss. And I've got a picture of one of those alligators to show you. Here we go. And I should say that none of the animals we used for this study were killed specifically for this scientific project. These are southern alligators. They're a protected species in the US, but we had permits to obtain these particular specimens and do with them as we decided to. Now, I should also say that alligators are not species that you would find in the deep sea. They are freshwater animals. They live in swamps and rivers. So you may well be wondering why we went to the effort of putting them down in the deep sea. Well, the reason is that the deep is a very hungry place. There's no sunlight down there, so there's no algae and plants to make new food. And most of the food turns up in the deep sea, just sprinkling down from above. It's little bits of organic matter that trickle down. We call it marine snow. It's really not as nice as it sounds. It's mostly bits of dead plankton and poo raining down, and there's just not very much of it. So, if a great big chunk of organic matter lands in the abyss, like for example a dead alligator, then interesting things will happen. And that's what we wanted to find out. And we think that alligators probably do get into the deep without the help of scientists. After floods and storms, dead alligators get washed offshore and they probably end up sinking down into the deep. So we took our alligators and we motored off the shore and went into the Gulf of Mexico. We didn't just chuck them off the side of the boat, otherwise we would have had a tough time finding them again. So we loaded them into a metal wire box, like a sort of deep sea elevator, and we lowered them down 2,000 metres to the abyss below us. We had this piece of amazing equipment to help us. This is a deep diving submersible, this yellow thing at the top. It's not one of the ones that humans climb inside. It's all controlled from the surface. It has cameras, it has robotic arms, and it helped us to lay out these alligators and then also to go back and see what had happened to them some time later. Now, no one has ever done this before, so we had no idea what to expect. And when we went back a day later to check on the first alligator, we were utterly astounded at the scene that we saw unfolding on the cameras, the monitor screens that we had on the ship, as we saw this. Hopefully you can make out, this is the alligator down at just over 2,000 metres, and already these guys have found it and they're eating it. I've got a close-up shot there of these pink things, and they are giant isopods. They are relatives of woodlice, which live in the garden. In fact, I've just been out and found one for you in this little jar here. Hopefully you can see. They're the ones that roll up into little balls when they get scared. Giant isopods in the deep sea, though, are massive. They're the size of rugby balls. And we think that's because it's such a hungry place. These are scavengers, but they can go for up to 2 or 3 years without eating anything. And if they find something big and juicy like a dead alligator, they will feast themselves and then keep going for years. And they are just amazing things. And this, I should say, these pictures come from LUMCON, the Louisiana University's Marine Consortium. And they were the guys planning and running this expedition and sending us these amazing pictures from the abyss. So that was alligator number 1. The second alligator we looked at after a month. Team went back to go and have another look. We sent down the deep diving submersible, and by that time this one was stripped bare to a skeleton. They found this intricate skeleton of an alligator lying down in the abyss. Its skull, its vertebrae were all there, and as the camera got closer we noticed that it looked like it was covered in red shaggy carpet. And this was a very exciting moment because it showed us that this alligator was being colonised by bone-eating worms. Now, I don't have a photo of one of these, but I have drawn you a picture. These ones are relatives of earthworms, but they're not really like any worms that we know from land. They don't have mouths, they don't have guts. They've got these red feathery gills to breathe through. They live in this tube, and then they have this green root at the bottom. Now, this root secretes acid, which dissolves the bones. They push it inside, and then inside these roots they have bacteria living there, which help them then to digest the collagen inside these bones, and that's what they eat. Scientists first discovered these on dead whales. They accidentally bumped into a whale skeleton in the deep, as you do, and noticed that it was covered in these strange pink worms which no one had ever seen before. There's still so much we don't know about these things. We don't know where they hang out, how they find a dead whale or a dead bone of some sort. But they are extraordinary creatures that have evolved another way of surviving in the deep, where there's very little food, but occasionally something awesome like an alligator will come along and they make the most of it. And the coolest thing about our alligator was that the bone-eating worms we found on them belonged to 2 new species that had never been seen before. So that was really quite cool. There was a third alligator as well. This one we went back to after just 8 days, but it was nowhere to be seen. We went back to the spot we left it at and there was no sign. All there was a mark on the seabed and a trail leading off into the dark. So of course we followed that trail to see where it might have ended up. And all we found at the end of it was a large metal weight which we tied to the alligator, and the rope which we tied around it had been bitten clean through. Something very big had grabbed this alligator, dragged it across the abyss, and then got away with it. So we think it could have been one of 2 large species of shark that live in the Gulf of Mexico. There are Greenland sharks and there are 6 gill sharks. Most sharks have 5 gills, these guys have 6. They grow big enough and they've got big enough, strong enough jaws potentially to bite through that rope. But there is another possibility. Some other researchers were working not so far away at the same time. They were lowering down cameras into the deep to look for a different predator that operates down there. And they had hours of footage to look through, but eventually they saw a big tentacle reaching out from the dark towards their camera, and they're pretty sure it was a giant squid. So we'll never know for sure. But there is a possibility that our third alligator was found and taken off by a giant squid, which is just awesome. So 3 alligators, 3 fates, and 3 glimpses into the strange and wonderful world of the deep sea.
I want to live by the ocean. I want to swim in the sea. My heart, it belongs to the
That is brilliant. Jess Hitchcock. And if you want to see her do that song again, or in fact another song as well, we had her on our Stay at Home Festival, Cosmic Shambles. I think it was about 4 or 5 days ago. You can still find all of those. They're all still up online. It was her and the brilliant Australian humorist, comedian, actor, writer, Sean McAuliffe as well. But Jess Hitchcock stuff is really worth catching up with. Thank you again, everyone, by the way, who's been, we've got generosity in the tip jar. And thank you very much to Royal Albert Hall as well. Oh, God, I wish we were there. I've even got all my blinking things, passes and stuff, so I can go anywhere I wanted. But now we're going to have a little bit of discussion about the future and about what we as humans need to do to help preserve such an incredible biome, such an incredible world of life. So Helen Czerski is still with us, and we're also joined by Tamsin Edwards and Liz as well. Stop! With major problems in the world of conservation and beyond that, but also it's always important to look at what we can be optimistic about. So Helen, just starting with you, where should we be looking to go? Right, this is something that is working now, and we need to promote it, and we need more people to know about it.
Well, the first thing I think is understanding of what the ocean is. And in some ways, we've got a head start because we've got the poster child of the ocean, and things like coral reefs are the sort of thing that really everybody loves them. And of course, Liz Bonnin, who's here with us, has spent a lot of time diving on coral reefs, looking at them. So Liz, just tell us a little bit about what's amazing about coral reefs and why are they so important?
Ooh, where to start? Well, first of all, when I first started researching coral reefs before I even dived on one, what amazed me was the animals themselves, the coral animals themselves. These tiny little 1-3 millimeter big, 2 layers of cells, little tentacles, very simple organisms that are capable of building these mega structures out of calcium and carbonate ions. There's a lovely comparison that it would be like humans building a structure that went around the planet like 46 times. They're extraordinary animals that are incredibly resilient and have all sorts of different strategies for surviving, for coping with, when there is too much sunlight. They biofluoresce, which is extraordinary in itself. They recycle nutrients. They obviously provide this habitat, this feeding ground, this breeding ground, these nurseries for an entire plethora of species. Coral reefs are the most biodiverse, ecosystems under the sea. So they are absolutely extraordinary little animals that are capable of things that belie their size. And not only that, they're animals, but actually, because of the algae that live in their tissues that provide about 90% of the food to the corals, they're sort of like half animal, half plant. They're absolutely awe-inspiring in themselves. And they're important because, we still don't fully understand all of the functionalities of coral reefs. So what we do know is that because of their incredible richness and biodiversity, they are absolutely vital for the health of our oceans. Not only that, because they attract so many different species from all different corners of the globe at different times of the year, they're absolutely crucial for the health of the entire ocean in the sense of all these nutrients that are being passed to and from the coral reefs. And then, of course, with just their role as sort of nurseries, this is where they're basically known as sort of the foundation of life for the blue planet. So they are absolutely vital and absolutely crucial and absolutely wondrous.
And it is, they are amazing. They are amazing places. And it's not just they're pretty. It's very important, like you said, that they have a function that is very important. And you recently have been lucky enough to go to Heron Island. Now, I didn't know until recently that Heron Island, which is a small island off Australia where it's surrounded by reefs, was actually chosen to go on the Voyager Golden Record as the best example of Earth's biodiversity and the amazing things the ocean had to offer. Now, Liz, you went there recently. Just very briefly, tell us a little bit about what it was like when you went there and what it's like
right
now.
So quickly, just to say that about a year or so before that, I had been to Lizard Island in the north of the Great Barrier Reef that had experienced a mass coral bleaching event in 2016. So it was pretty decimated, really depressing to dive that site because all of it is sort of this dead white skeleton where it used to be one of the most lush areas of the Great Barrier Reef. So then you cut to Heron Island, which is in the south, which is somewhat cooler. which escaped the two previous mass bleaching events. 2016, 2017 were really bad and resulted in us losing 50% of our Great Barrier Reef. So the situation is dire. And I knew heron was in slightly better condition, but I knew that it was struggling too. And it's almost like I didn't expect it to be as magical as I thought. So I remember the first time I went over the boat backwards and I opened my eyes and it just blew me away. It was extraordinary. It's still a whole plethora of life in relatively pristine condition compared to the rest of the reef. And it was just incredible. And anybody who ever dives the Great Barrier Reef always says it changes you, and it's hard to put into words. But it is the most extraordinary environment to be in. So it was utterly gorgeous, and scientists working night and day, doing incredible things, being incredibly creative to try and recolonize parts of the reef around heron as well, but also throughout the Great Barrier Reef. Cut to 2020, and a survey was done, an aerial survey was done just in March, showing that another mass bleaching event has happened. But unlike 2016 that affected the north of the Great Barrier Reef and 2017 that affected sort of the middle part of the reef, this mass bleaching event has affected the entire Great Barrier Reef, including heron. And when I read that,
sorry to interrupt you, because I want to move on to just a second to the reason for these bleachings, because we've all heard of coral bleachings. We know there are bad ideas. We know there's damage done, but let's just get to why. So there's two major causes. There's often many stresses, but marine heat waves and ocean acidification. Tamsin, tell us a little bit about those two things. What is a marine heat wave, and why do they happen?
These are two concepts that are not very widely known about, actually. Marine heat waves, even in the scientific community, were not really thought about that much until a few years ago. And that's the idea that just like on the land, just like in the air, we have heat waves where it's an unusually hot temperature for a period of days or weeks. Just like that, in the ocean, we get fluctuations in temperature where, of course, on a background of global warming, those fluctuations are getting worse. So it's a period of weeks or months, an area that can be thousands of kilometres wide of an unusually high temperature, which can have these devastating effects on ecosystems. Now, of course, it's a sort of double threat, as you say, with the ocean acidification. And that's the idea not of climate change itself, but the same CO2 emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere that are warming the air. About a quarter are going into the oceans and dissolving in the water, which is good for the global warming that it saves, but bad because it lowers the pH of the ocean through the chemistry changes that you get. So the fact that corals are so unique and so fragile and diverse means that they are very vulnerable to these kind of multiple threats: the temperature changes, the ocean acidification, the storms, the unsustainable development. And that's why scientists have predicted that we could lose up to 90% of tropical coral reefs at 1.5 degrees of warming and up to 99% at 2 degrees. And that's one of the most shocking predictions I think there is.
And it's worth mentioning here that when people think about climate change, there's still this perception that climate is about weather, that it's about the atmosphere. But actually, we know that of all the extra heat that Earth is taking up, 93 is ending up in the oceans. Just tell us a little bit about where that heat is going. Is it evenly distributed? Is it in certain places? Where is this heat?
Absolutely. I mean, it's coming from the atmosphere, so it's mainly affecting the surface of the ocean. It takes time to get down into the deep waters. But the ocean has this kind of, a slow time scale of response. So the ocean's going to keep warming for at least 20 years, even if we cut all emissions dead right now. So there's that kind of time lag where we know that the heat that's getting gradually absorbed gets gradually taken down into the deeper ocean, starts affecting life throughout, has all these complex interactions with the sea ice in the Arctic, for example, changes in the saltiness of the water and the circulation. And some of these impacts might be reversible if we limit or reduce global warming in the future, but some of them could last hundreds, even thousands of years if they're not limited quite strongly now.
And it's worth mentioning here that, of course, the thing that people forget is that the life in the ocean is written on the canvas of the physical nature of the ocean. And I want to come back to Liz, because there's an aspect, when we think about the physical ocean, we think about temperature and density and all those kind of things. But actually, there's another thing, which is the sound. Tell us a little bit, Liz, about the sound on the coral reef.
The sound on the coral reef is extraordinary, and it's thanks to Steve Simpson, who's been working on soundscapes on coral reefs for several years now, that I got to hear, thanks to a multi-directional hydrophone that he now uses, the absolute layers of sounds, everything from clicks to hoots, to grunts, to something that sounds like an old man burping. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's an incredibly busy place when it comes to sound, and all of those sounds have incredibly important functions. So to find your mate, to alert your family about where you are, to warn off or ward off predators, etc. So the function of sound on coral reef is absolutely vital. But what's really interesting about what Steve Simpson is doing with his team is that, first of all, we knew very little about what all these sounds meant and which animals were vocalizing in what way. So thanks to the improved technology, he now knows, he can identify, what animals are vocalizing in what way. But considering how under pressure coral reefs are, what he's doing using that sort of repertoire of sounds now is he's basically being a reef DJ. So he plays back the sounds of coral reefs at particular times in order to recolonize degraded reefs. So, for example, really quickly, the first thing that needs to recolonize a degraded reef are herbivores, small fish who've come back out from the open ocean as in their larval stages, and they're looking for a home, but they need a crevice to hide in because they're tiny. So if Steve plays back the sound of snapping shrimp first, the little fish goes, "Ooh, this is cool, they're a snapping shrimp, and they're the ones that make the burrows for me, so I'll be safe." So they come in first. And then, understanding how incredibly complex the ecosystem is, he knows that the next fish need to be this particular type in order for, to keep building up the habitat. And I just think that is the most creative, bold, ambitious, brilliant thing. That really celebrates what scientists are capable of doing, thinking outside the box, and using sound to give the reefs a fighting chance.
It is a lovely piece of research, and I'm really looking forward to where all that work goes in the future. And a lot of this hangs on the not just our ability to understand the system, the reefs and the ocean, but the ability to predict what's going to happen next. If we do this, what will happen next? So, Tamsin, tell us a little bit about are we going to have an ocean forecast in the same way that we have a weather forecast? How does the ocean work?
Well, it's tremendously difficult to understand the ocean, as you know, as an oceanographer, Helen, that to get out on the surface of the ocean and take measurements is difficult. It's not something that I do. I rely on all the scientists around the world working together to bring together all that data from satellites, from ships, from floats that are diving down into the water. Tremendous complexity and collaboration. Putting that data together into computer models to improve them and test them and make predictions, it's getting better all the time. But in some senses, we've only had the data we need for the last 10 years. We haven't had the information we need. So we're only just starting to learn how to make those forecasts, whether it's short term, whether it's long term climate change. We're only just getting the computing power to actually resolve the details of the ocean that we need. There's a tremendously important thing of oceans, which is the idea of eddies in the ocean, of little whirlpools that have incredible sort of effects on the energy and the properties of the ocean, which if you don't have a fine grid of your computer model, you just don't know they exist. And this stuff is only really just starting to become the state of the art. There's a lovely book actually I've been reading by Sarah Dry called Waters of the World, which is a history of climate change told through water, and very much the detail of those scientific expeditions that are gathering the data and then understanding things like eddies in the ocean with computer models, so we could put that together and make these forecasts. But yeah, we're learning all the time, and I think some of the predictions that are coming out of the more complex models sometimes are more hopeful actually than we might have thought with the simpler models perhaps from 20 years ago.
Brilliant. Okay, so we are almost out of time, but I just wanted to ask both of you before we finish, just what's a call to action? Because often the first thing people say is, "Oh, what can I do?" We can see things are happening to the ocean very quickly. Each of you, what would be your top things that people can do to help, improve the state of the oceans in the future, or at least stop them getting worse? Liz, perhaps you can go first.
I think it goes beyond the ocean per se at this point. As a biologist, I've kind of had to reluctantly look at economics now and human behavior, because I think what we're learning from all of our environmental crises, loss of biodiversity on land, climate change, ocean acidification and warming, coral reef degradation, it all boils down to how we live on this planet and how we are still sort of slaves to these unrestrained patterns of production and consumption, right? And sort of still looking for economic growth as the model of the 21st century. And I personally feel that's an outdated model that's causing all of these problems. So what gives me hope is COVID-19 will potentially play a role in this, as hideous as the situation has been. But it's ultimately about changing the way we behave and changing the way we live on the planet. And there are some interesting things coming out of economists from Oxford University. Donut Economics is working with Amsterdam, the first city in the world to adopt a different way to run their city post-COVID. And for me, that's where the hope lies. Fundamentally deciding we are going to create a paradigm shift in how we use the resources of our planet in order to protect everything, including our ocean.
And Tamsin, how about you?
Yeah, I'd echo the fact that it's not about the individual action. It's really the structural stuff. The individual action is the people that really care about the ocean. Everything from Save the Whale back in the 70s and 80s through, Liz has done amazing work on highlighting plastic pollution, and then getting all of those individuals together collectively to put pressure on the governments, on the corporations to pull the big levers, on the planet. It's not about, not using a plastic straw one day and then it's really about the structural change and about keeping that momentum up and that hope up that we can change things, and that we've just got to push the right people who have the right levers rather than worrying about what we can do on a day-to-day basis.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. This is an ocean planet. Ultimately, we are ocean people. And I think these are fascinating. They're really important and fascinating questions to discuss. But thank you both very much, so much for joining us. It's lovely to see you both. And Robin, back to you.
Oh, you see, this is just like when we really do the shows normally for the Albert Hall. I've got loads more questions. I want to know about seaweed farms, but there's no time for that now. So I'll find out next year. We'll find out more about seaweed farms. It's in a very interesting documentary called 2040. Now, our next guest is someone that I work with so much, and the reason I work with them is because she is just brilliant and always just delightful to work with, and always so many ideas. And we did 8 weeks of a morning show, a daily morning show, and during lockdown, and we had guests like Mark Gatiss and Joe Brand and Reece Shearsmith and Stuart Lee and Sarah Pascoe and Natalie Haynes and all of these people. And it was a really lovely thing to start every single day doing a show with her and having these conversations. So please welcome to her stage, into your front room, attic or basement, Josie Long. Now this is an interesting technical hitch, because now what we'll have, instead of seeing Josie Long's set, is possibly Josie Long preparing for her set. We will discover in a moment. She's still currently, I believe, on mute. So this is a lovely moment. I think we've seen Josie, that was beautiful. We actually saw the creative process in work there, because I went, Josie Long, and we looked to you going, maybe I'll do that, maybe I'll do that bit, maybe I'll do that bit. So I'll do the whole intro all over again. Can you hear me now? I don't think we can hear you yet. We can nearly hear you. This is also, by the way, for anyone who's actually been
doesn't happen with the microphone, does it?
Yeah, the microphone. This thing on, ladies and gentlemen. There are, as I said before, there's always things that go awry when we do these things in theatres as well. So it's nice that we've kept that authenticity, whatever front room people in. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome a very, very close, not merely showbiz friend, but personal friend, Josie Long.
Hello, it's very nice to be here. I am a couple of years ago, I wrote a show about going down to the bottom of the ocean for the radio, and I thought I would share some of it with you because I enjoyed it a lot doing that. I wrote it when I was pregnant, but I didn't know that I was. And I presume that affected it in some nebulous, impressionistic way. Okay, so I'm reading highlights from it because the whole thing is 16 pages long, and that is too long, I'll tell you that for free. Also, I have been watching the show on and off whilst I did chores around the house and babying and stuff like that, and I am aware that you've had actual scientific experts talking about the bottom of the sea, so don't worry too much about what I've got to say. Okay. I think about what it means to specialise, to work hard on one thing for your whole life, a single thing. I misread it, my own script that literally is in front of me. It's very hard for me. I want everything all at once and quickly. It's one of the reasons why not only do I love a buffet, I will always be the first one on that buffet. I don't care if it's your wedding day. I will greet your wife eating her wedding cake. Like, oh, you're beautiful, Sharon. Why are you crying? Oh, yes, sorry. I had to take the little figures off to get the chocolate layer, but they broke in my hand while I was doing it, which I don't think is a bad omen. How do you specialise when you want to try it all and when your life is so short? The sea is perfect for reinforcing your sense of inadequacy and smallness. Like, you know when you see a bird hopping along the floor in front of you or trying to hop up some steps and you think, what are you doing? You look ridiculous. You should be flying, but instead you're just stumbling about on the ground. Stop it. You're not meant to be here. This isn't what you're meant to be doing. Go away. That's what fish think when they see us trying to swim in the sea. Struggling along at slower than walking pace, flapping about in a frilly pair of pants. The sea is so immense. The ocean covers 60% of the planet. I don't even cover 60% of a reasonable queen bed. And if you ever want to be reminded of your insignificance, you can try to wade when the waves are too strong and have the sea just wham you onto the floor whenever it wants. Sometimes the world is just so overwhelming and so full of so much that I can't cope. Thinking about the amount of life in the oceans is too much information, too much stimulus to understand. I can't bear it. I want to get over myself, but the ocean is the largest habitat in the world, and it's also the biggest bath. If you're looking for things to find and humbly study, and depth in every way, that's why it's there. This is where to look. So this is where I'm going to take you on an imaginary deep sea dive, okay? Now, I'm having to like cut little bits. I hope you're enjoying it. The top part of the ocean is teeming with life. Everyone knows that. The light from the sun means there's coral reefs and kelp forests and seagrass beds and boisterous waters full of activity and colour. We all know that. But what happens when you let's just go a little bit lower. I want you all to imagine you're getting into James Cameron's bathysphere with me, because like me, you've pretended that you're a legitimate marine biologist and lied to him, and now you have full access with it. Get ready. We're going to go underwater. Okay. We're going to go quickly past 60 to 80 metres of depth, just quite quickly. Too deep for shallow diving, but too shallow for us to stop in. The very much middle brown layer of the sea. Forget that. Get down. Now we're getting to 200 metres. That's the twilight zone. Very exciting. Some light gets through, barely any. Temperature drops, full of astonishing creatures. Like, I can't even say it out loud, Phronima, a kind of flamboyant, transparent jellyfish shrimp that was the inspiration for the alien in Alien. The whole area feels like it can't be real. The creatures look like they're designed by Jim Henson. Big, toothy things with underbites like bulldogs and massive round eyes like tapioca in a bubble tea got loose and got angry. The sci-fi that was inspired by this world is more common to us than the real stuff. And I know why. So many of them have only recently ever been seen, and only by a tiny number of scientists. In the past, people tried to use deep nets to try and trawl for what was in the twilight zone. But this is the thing, the animals that live there never encounter anything hard. So they just kind of drift about in the open water. So they have these soft little bodies. So when people lowered down the nets to try and pull them up, the poor little creatures just kind of turned to gack. So the lecturers would have had to been like, well, we've investigated fully. There's just a big old super gack down there. Best not to double check, in my opinion. But the delicate creatures, they're so wonderful. Now, they produce light themselves. This is where you have to imagine we've turned the light off in the bathysphere so we can properly look at them. It's astonishing. I remember the first time I saw any kind of phosphorescence in the sea. It was at night in Adelaide, Australia, during a heatwave. I waded in to cool down, and as I swished my hands about, the sea lit up in blues and greens. It felt so miraculous that it couldn't possibly be natural. Now, we're going down deeper. We're going to the dark zone where no light can penetrate. Just the deepest, darkest blue possible. Complete dark, except... And this is where if I was like an animator or something, I'd be like... Or if I had any props, or indeed any time in this lockdown beyond the like hour and a half that my daughter's... Bioluminescence. little bacteria that create blue, green, and sometimes bright red charges of light that illuminate the darkness. And some things like squids dotted all over with beautiful blue. I'm just cutting out a bit where me and my friend Maeve talked about a very specific joke where the anglerfish, where the male is like a parasite, but it gives the female a very steady supply of sperm. And then the joke there is basically like dating in your 30s. Anyway, I don't have time for that. Hang on. Please. No matter what you're doing, unless you work in emergency medicine or safeguarding a nuclear well, what I would urge you to do after this show is to look online at some of these astonishing things that live in the dark zone. I'm not enough of a poet to do them justice. The gulper eel, whose mouth and jaw is so monstrously large that it can gulp prey as large as itself. It's like a snake that's eaten an umbrella, but both of those things were initially haunted. And so many of these deep sea creatures are so difficult for us to understand. Their whole ways of life, their behaviours, and the ways their bodies have evolved are so separate and different to ours. We don't know why half of these animals have such beautiful light displays. It could be to mate, it could be to attack or to defend. This could be fish Las Vegas. We don't know yet. And these creatures are truly mind-blowing. There literally are creatures called bone-eating zombie worms, which I know have been covered so far in the show because I was watching. They shock and astonish even the people who study them. Look at the state of this monstrous whopper, they say. Now we're going to be reaching the very bottom of the ocean, a totally separate world to us. Ours, the landscape wasn't even forged in ice ages or through rivers forming valleys. Life down here doesn't depend on the sun. It has nothing to do with our reality or our way of life. Yes, that's right, they're terrorists. Right. It blows my mind to think about how few people have come to the very bottom of the ocean. And for good reason, it's not easy. The bathysphere that we've all been in is claustrophobic. We've all been stuck here, as you know, not for 6 minutes, but for 10 hours. And there's been no toilet. And on an unrelated note, please don't open the Kilner jar to the left of you. I'm such a coward. And yet deep sea explorers put themselves through these terrifying things. And every single time they do, they uncover new species and they see things for the first time. Not just that, whole ecosystems. Hang on, I'm just coming to the last bit. I have to scroll through a script. Now, yes, I could have edited the script, but I don't trust myself with computers well enough to do so. This is the thing that's so exciting for me. They still have 90% of the bottom of the ocean left to explore, right? And it was only in the 1950s that the first global map of the ocean was put together using sonar from ships to be able to understand its depth and geography. And later on, satellite data could back it up. But sonar and satellites don't show us what's down there and how it works. We have a map of all of it. But in terms of exploration, we've only explored about 3%. And in terms of actually being seen by a human eye, it's 1/200th of a 1% of it. Feels like a flood. 1/200th of a percent. That's like me with knowledge, if I'm lucky. So it's good. I am as good as all of marine biology, but I find the vastness of it very exciting. That in the sea, there's a universe in miniature. That's what the deep sea biologist John Copley says. He says, it's like there's a universe in miniature in the sea, and one we can actually explore. And that there's no longer any part of the deep sea ocean that's inaccessible to us if we have the will to go there. So don't mope about. There's always stuff to do and find. And the things we will find help us develop in medicine, in engineering, all of it. Now, 1 second. This is what the biologist John Copley, who I tried to interview and then mucked up the timing, couldn't actually interview him, but sent a couple of emails with, and he's a very good guy. I watched a lot of his stuff on YouTube. He says, if you can, find a clean jar and put seawater next time you can find some and put it on your desk. Right. The marine biologist John Copley talks about it like this. 1 milliliter of seawater has 1 million bacteria in it. 30 litres of seawater, which is about half of a bathtub, has as many microbes as there are stars in our galaxy. So if you have 300 mil, what you've got is a miniature 2-scale version of a galaxy of life to remind you of everything that there's left to discover. He talks about the contrast and strangeness of deep sea life and how that made him appreciate the same things about what he'd otherwise taken for granted around us, noticing the mad engineering of dandelion clocks and wildflowers, etc. So basically, you don't have to always be the expert. Some people already are, and you can find them and listen. I want to enter the Oregon Aquarium, where retired marine biologists give their time to show people around. They showed me how curious anemones reach out to touch you if you put your fingers up close to them. I took notes on the free map with my pen. Is there anything better than taking notes? You can reach out and they will touch your fingers. It's okay to be a perpetual student. You won't reach the bottom. You might not even scratch the surface, but at least you're in the water. So that's some of a script I wrote, hurriedly edited in real time. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'm sorry because I think I did 1 minute over my time, but
Doesn't
honestly,
matter.
It's better than we could have hoped.
Thank you so much, Josie. And that is, we should tell everyone that you are streaming every now and again as well. Sometimes a couple of times a week. Your solo show Tender as well. And also, as I mentioned before, all the shows that we did, the daily shows, are still up, and you can see Mark Gatiss and Joe Brand and all of those other. I love an aquarium. I love one of my favourites. I went to the aquarium in Vancouver, which is in a really beautiful where I was exactly 1 year ago. 1 year ago, I was in Vancouver, and they also had a beautiful artwork by Douglas Coupland as well, the writer of Shampoo Planet and all of Generation X, all those things, and he done this incredible artwork about the sea. It was a delight.
That's so nice. Robin, I really like the fact that you've dressed up for tonight.
Yeah.
A nice shirt, nice jacket.
Yeah, I'm wearing my scientific corduroy, and do you know what? I had not known how hot my attic is if you're wearing corduroy, but there we are. Josie, we better get on with the band, but thank you so much for coming. And as I said, please do take a look at all the stuff that we've been doing. We've had a lot of fun creating new and strange things. Now, the next band we have on, this is one of the delights, is when we put together these shows, very often we ask our favourite bands. I still have I think a career high was managing to get The Cure to do a gig at Hammersmith, and then me suggesting to Brian Cox that he joins in on piano and they do an Oompa version of Love Cats. It is the finest Oompa version of Love Cats I think you're ever going to hear. Last year, or 2 years ago, at Sea Shambles, we had public service broadcasting. This year, as you've heard already, we have British Sea Power, which sets a kind of rule, PSB, BSP, which means that hopefully next year's show will either have the Pet Shop Boys or the Patti Smith Band. We can't be sure, but this genuinely British Sea Power, one of my favourite bands of all time. I saw them 1 year, I think, at 6 different festivals. I can't remember where we started at the beginning of the summer. The final one, I think I saw them at End of the Road. They are always wonderful. So here is some of the stuff, the British Sea Power, very, very special footage of what we were going to be seeing live at the Royal Albert Hall. Here they are.
Hi, I'm Martin Noble from British Sea Power. We're all disappointed not to be playing at the Royal Albert Hall tonight, but we do have something for you in these days of dislocation. Here's some behind-the-scenes footage of us writing and creating From the Sea to the Land Beyond.
It was amazing cutting the film to British Sea Power because it was perfect, really. We kept trying these tracks and it was as if they were made for the images in the film. And it was just this very, I mean, we'd hardly met, hadn't we? We'd met once in a cafe, but it felt like you were in the room with us while we were cutting the film. It was really
terrifying.
Terrifying. Yeah, it was right at the beginning when we were just sort of wondering whether it was going to work. And then as soon as we found that, and in fact you've now changed it, the first track, we just thought, this is going to be good. And it will.
We're going to go on a deep dive into the ocean. Now, I have a bee in my bonnet about people not really appreciating the ocean, but it is hard because we live on land and we look at the top. We don't get to see inside. So I'm going to take you on a little journey inside the structure of the ocean, because all of this blue we can see on the planet isn't just some big pond that's all the same. It has a physical structure, and I want to take you on a journey that shows you that structure. And this is going to be our guide. So this creature here is a fabulous thing. This is the Pacific bluefin tuna, and these are astonishing animals. They grow to up to 2 meters long. They can swim at 30 miles an hour for short bursts when they're hunting. They are predators. They also can keep their own body temperature above the surrounding water. Most fish are cold-blooded, so they're the same temperature as everything around them. But the tunas can keep themselves warm, and that means that they have the freedom to move through lots of different places in the water without getting too cold. So I'm going to tell you the story of this fish and where it goes, and it all starts over here. So they spawn over here in the East China Sea and the Sea of Japan. And after 12 or so months here, when they get to about this long, about 30 centimeters long, they take on an astonishing journey. So the first thing is they come out here and they start this journey across the Pacific. The total journey is 5,000 miles. And the first thing they meet is one of the biggest features in this part of the ocean. There is a big, warm, salty current of water that comes up here called the Kuroshio. It's a western boundary current. So we have the Gulf Stream on America in the Atlantic, and the Kuroshio does something very similar off Japan. So warm, salty water coming up here, and it meets cold, fresh water coming down from here. So right at the point where the tuna start their journey, we've got this place where warm, salty water and cold, fresh water are next to each other, and they mix, but only very slowly. So you have this wall in the ocean, and this is an ocean front, and these are like cities, because whenever you get two different water masses coming together, it's like a city. Everything can mix together. You share the nutrients, you share whatever's going on, and so these are incredibly productive areas. So there's this wall that carries on across the ocean that is full of food. So the tuna follow this all the way across the ocean, and on their way, as they're traveling, and they can cover maybe 150 kilometers a day, somewhere, in this kind of region, they might start to pass these massive structures in the ocean, which are big columns of warm water, warm core rings. So in the cold water to the north, you get little roundabouts, columns of water spinning off that sit and can exist for 2 years just spinning in the cold water above, that way around. And these are massive structures in the water that passing across. So the tuna carry on, and then as they carry on out into the deep ocean here, the tuna will stay in the top 200 meters of the ocean, but deep beneath it is the cold depths. Far colder water goes down for 4 or 5 kilometers here. And the thing is that the top layer of the ocean, the bit the tuna is swimming in, is something called the mixed layer. It's warmed by the sun. It's got lots of stuff going on in it. There's lots of things living in it, and it's quite turbulent. And this is a top warm layer to the ocean. But the tuna will be able to dip in and out of that, and dip down into the colder water beneath and come back into this. So they'll be able to see this structure in the ocean. And the amazing thing about just below the mixed layer there, that this top lid, there's a lid on the ocean of warm water, is that tiny creatures, zooplankton, hide just beneath the boundary during the day and then come up at night, come up just at dusk into the warmer water at the surface where they can feed, and at night they sink back down again. This is the largest migration on Earth. So as the tuna are swimming through this warm layer, they're being passed by zooplankton coming up to the surface and going back down again. And then the tuna, 5,000 miles later, this takes 2.5 months, they will come through to this part, the California coast and Mexico here. And this is another city-like part of the ocean. So the tuna now want to feed, they want to grow to full size. And the reason that what's going on here is that warm lid of the ocean, there are northerly winds that push down the coast of California, and the spin of the earth means that warm lid is pulled back. And so cold water can escape from underneath. And when you get cold, nutrient-rich water, you get this, it's called an upwelling. You get this place in the ocean where the nutrients from the deep reach the sunlight from the top, and all kinds of life can grow. So the tuna have found another city, really productive area, loads of fish. That's why there are so many fishing grounds here. And they'll spend a few years here, and then eventually the tuna will now be full size, so 1.5 meters, 2 meters across, and they're big enough now to start their journey back on this 5,000 mile thing, following the features of the ocean across the deep. And on their way back, they might stop at other features along the way. So here we've got a chain called the Emperor Seamount, and these are subsurface mountains. A lot of this ocean is really deep, flat ocean. But in here, what you get are these volcanoes that stick up, and even though they only may stick above the seafloor 1 or 2 kilometers, they basically push into the ocean, and as ocean currents come over the top, they have to move over the top, and that mixes the water above. So even though these seamounts could be 1 kilometer or so beneath the tuna, they're mixing water, they're bringing nutrients up, and this is also a very productive area. So the tuna might hang around there before it sets off back across the less productive water all the way back to Japan, where it will spawn and start again. So the point is here that as this tuna travels, it is passing through these enormous 3-dimensional structures. It is navigating through colder water, warmer water, water where there's loads of stuff growing. It's moving through the features that we can't see, but it depends on to rely, it depends on to live. And so although I love my globe here, I do have a problem with globes because they show the land as being stationary, which it is. These mountains are not moving. But they also show the ocean as stationary, and that's not true. There's so much movement. This is a dynamic shell of the planet. And I think it's really important to remember whenever we look at a map of the ocean that the map is lying a little bit because it shows it as still, when actually this is an engine, and this is the engine that keeps our planet running, makes our world as stable as it is. And it's critical that we understand this engine before we change it too much more. So now that was my pitch for understanding the 3-dimensional structure of the ocean, the bits underneath that the humans don't get to see. But now, to give us a much more human view of the surface of the ocean, the seashore, we have our resident seaside correspondent, Celia Jessen.
Hello, Sea Shambles. For my show and tell, I wanted to share with you a ball of fish egg casing. These were used by sailors as a sort of washing sponge, which may or may not be true, because I get my facts from Sheila at the WI Coffee Morning. Another thing I'd like to share with you is my National Galleries of Scotland book about Eileen Agar, the surrealist artist, and an object that she beachcombed at Lulworth Cove, which she called Seashore Monster. Can you see that there? She writes, "Digging like a child, hunting for treasure, I unpebbled a long snaky monster with a bird's beak. It was clothed in stones and shells and all sorts of other marine accretions, which gave it body and turned it into a remarkable object." I showed this to my husband Fred, wishing I could be as artistic and poetic, and Fred said that if he found one of those, it would be useful on his walks, because he could wave it at people with one end covered in a gardening glove to make sure people kept a safe distance. Now, to finish, I'm going to read to you from my diary. Wednesday. Everyone seems to be piling down to Milton Sands. I didn't think we ought to join them, but Fred pointed out that we now have face masks that I made out of an old slipper sock, as well as a handmade ventilator which fits on the back seat of the car, which Fred made inspired by the Great Escape tunnel scene, out of a pair of bellows and 3 slats from a bunk bed, and so not to worry, it'd be very relaxing. I do like a day out. Once Fred went on a murder mystery weekend, but Fred fell out with a man who was meant to be the vicar over the pronunciation of Leominster, and we went home early. When we arrived at Milton Sands, we parked in the car park overlooking the beach. Fred used his field glasses to assess the situation and muttered darkly about people who should be shot because they couldn't obey rules on sight. I found some Factor 45 in the glove box and sniffed it, and it took me right back, the smell of those SPF chemicals, to the last time we went to visit Frank in Antibes. Oh, sorry, Frank is my husband Fred's brother. When I first met Fred and Frank, I actually preferred Fred's brother Frank. I know it sounds awful, doesn't it, me saying it? But honestly, if Fred and Frank heard it, they wouldn't mind at all. We all know I ended up with the right one in the end. Frank is now an architect in the French Riviera. We got out of the car and were immediately thrilled by the white sand. Do you know, said Fred, that the white sand is unwanted lime dust excreted by the parrotfish? OK, Fred, I'm just going to go off and look at the rock pools. I darted away and found an enchanting array of multicoloured seaweed, half a green crab, and a handful of tiny European cowries, blush and peach, and a dainty driftwood shard, which I kept as a little memento. I kicked off my sandals and clung my toes to the rock. It was warm and wet, like a freshly made Sussex pond pudding, a remarkable dessert with a whole lemon at its core, coated in a clothing of suet. Suddenly then I heard a familiar voice. "What, old girl? Those cowries are smaller, you know, than their tropical counterparts, and they feed on sea squirts at shore level." It was Frank. He gazed down at me with his enormous chocolate button eyes, the sunlight bouncing off the sea spray on his shoulders, to look like fairy dust. He threw a skimmer. It was a threer. "Oh, Frank, how do you know so much about the sea and its contents?" "Well, at weekends I'm a deep-sea diving instructor." "I say! Would you like a lesson?" "I don't understand." "Well, I'd give you a one-to-one lesson. First of all, we'd put on wetsuits." "Yes, go on." "And then we'd practice with snorkel masks, looking at the seahorses and the coral beneath." "What is it?" "Nothing. It's just suddenly you look much younger, Frank. Like a little boy." "Go on." "Well, then I'd show you the wonders beneath. And then I'd haul you back into my boat and we'd share my enormous flask. It makes enough tea for 6 people. "Frank, are you making love to me?" "Yes." "I rather like it." "Stay here with me on the seashore, Celia. We can be in self-isolation for the rest of our lives." "Oh, Frank, yes. And I'll cook you up eggs Bridlington while you build me a glass summer house with a retractable washing line." "We'll do no such thing, you know. The tide's coming in." "I'm sorry?" "I said the tide's coming in. There's no even less room on the beach now. We have to leave." Oh. And suddenly I was back in the car with Fred. "Look, there's a group of 8 people and 3 dogs," he said. "There's no way they're part of the same family. We shall have to leave. It's just as well we stayed in the car." "Yes, Fred." And I wondered what Frank was doing now. Probably sitting on a dock with a film actress eating oysters straight from their shell, watching the sun go down, while I'm about to boil Fred's cricket whites and try and read my Joanna Trollope while he bangs on about the metric system. Oh dear, Di, I better go now. I am enjoying Sea Shambles, and for now I'm just going to have to listen to the sea. Goodbye.
That is Celia Jesson, who some of you will know is the brilliant Joanna Neary, and whose work is always an absolute delight. I think the first time I did a gig once where I put her on, it was Hammersmith Apollo, and she did a character called Pan's Person, in which she did an incredible Pan's People routine to Harry Nilsson's Can't Live If Living Is Without You. I don't know if that exists anywhere on the internet, but it is absolutely brilliant. I'll just remind you, by the way, the tip jar at the bottom, thank you very much for all of your generosity, and that is going to we have various sea charities that are being supported, and also the Stay at Home Festival and all of the kind of things that have gone on to make this happen. Thank you so much to Trent and Melinda, who've been producing all these things and have been working for free for the last, for a very long, but in particular the last 2 weeks, making sure we could still put this up. And also, of course, Royal Albert Home as well. Have a look at all that stuff. But most of all, go and join us for our Patreon, because then we can make more ridiculous things and more big things like this, because we like making them. That's what we spend the money on. We don't spend it on ourselves or trinkets. We like making things. Now, someone that we saw a little bit earlier this evening, and sadly, I think they've moved away now from where their guest swan was, because the midges became too much. So there may well be no more mallards, there may be no more swans, but let's find out as we go back to Steve Backshall.
Hello you all, my name's Steve Backshall, and I'm here to talk to you about my passion, which is sharks. Anyone who's seen any of my kids' television programs will know that they tend to be themed around predators, deadly predators, but that is always animals that are deadly in their world to other animals, not to us as human beings. If we ever deal with animals that people are frightened of, the last thing we ever do is suggest that they are dangerous to us as people, because wild animals very rarely are. And the most definite case of that is the sharks. If you look at the statistics, even if you go back to when records began in 1580, there have only really been a handful of people ever killed by sharks. In fact, nowadays you are more likely to be killed by a falling soft drinks machine. You are hundreds of times more likely to be struck by a bolt of lightning. You're more likely to be killed by a falling coconut, and you are twice as likely to be killed taking a selfie. And if this isn't worthy of a Darwin Award, then I don't know what is. Actually, if you look at the sharks as a group, the majority of them are small cat sharks, which kind of look a bit like this. And, you know, one of these definitely isn't going to kill you unless you trip over it and bang your head or choke on one, I suppose. All of this is a really good reason why what you read in the media and the press about sharks should be completely ignored. Let's face it, the press will say whatever they like about animals because they kind of know that wild animals can't sue. In actual fact, the sharks are the most beautiful, intoxicating, and diverse of all groups of animals. So they come in an immense variety of different shapes and sizes, from the dwarf lantern shark, the smallest, which is about that big when it's fully grown, through the thresher shark with a tail that is as long as its own body, right through to the whale shark, the biggest of all fish, which is a true giant, can be way, way bigger than a London bus. And they have extraordinary abilities. The epaulet shark can wander over a coral reef, over dry land effectively, to get to other pools. The tassel wobbegong, surely one of the weirdest and best camouflaged creatures on the planet, and the manta ray with its sinuous, graceful way of moving. But they've not always been like that. So if you go back about 300 million years, then this was in our seas. It's called Stethecanthus, and it kind of looks a little bit like it's got a hairbrush stuck to its back. This, though, was not a terrifying animal at all. It was actually quite small, as you can see in this image here, seen for scale alongside one of the Charlie's Angels for some reason. Go back even not quite so far, about 200 million years ago, and Helicoprion was swimming in our seas. And this extraordinary shark kind of looked like it was trying to swallow a buzzsaw. That whirl of teeth is actually really well represented in the fossil record, and by extrapolating its size, people believe that Helicoprion could have been up to, or maybe even exceeding 6 meters in length, so a giant, giant shark. About 200 million years ago, and you're seeing fossils like this. Most shark bodies don't fossilize that well because they have cartilage rather than bone, which is not as good at fossilizing, but you do occasionally get amazing fossils like this, over 200 million years old, and you compare that to a modern leopard zebra shark, and you can see that all of the fins are in the same place. Essentially, it is pretty much the same animal. So even though they've been around for 400, possibly even 500 million years, this is not some ancient, forgotten throwback. It is a modern masterpiece, and they have unbelievable senses that are the equal of any other animal. So looking at the front of the shark, you can see the nares, or nostrils, and those are extraordinarily potent at picking up just even one single drop of blood in an Olympic swimming pool-sized area of water. And then all those little dots all over the snout that kind of look like highly squeezable blackheads, those are the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are a sense that's extraordinary at picking up the weak electrical fields given off by the moving muscles of their prey. And quite often when we're filming sharks, we'll find that they're really interested in our cameras. They'll come and stick their snout right into the camera lens. And I'm convinced that it's because they can sense those weak electrical fields, and they kind of, it's like prey. It's the same sort of things as they're getting out of the creatures they might be feeding on. So they're intrigued, they're interested, and they stick their snout right into your camera. There is one incredible side effect to that super sense, which is that if a shark's snout is stimulated, then they all of a sudden get into this state where they're like a big Labrador puppy, and they just kind of, oh, that's so nice. That's just amazing. Just rub it just there. And in some cases, they will actually go to sleep. It's called tonic immobility. You see here this young tiger shark being flipped over, and effectively, it's just gone to sleep. It is totally comatose. Biologists can use this as a way of effectively putting a shark to sleep, and they can then test their stomach contents and do other kind of science on them without putting the shark through any stress. Now, I said earlier on that sharks are not dangerous to us as human beings for the most part. Well, I've put that to the ultimate test. I've dived with every single species of shark that is considered of any danger to human beings: great hammerheads, tigers, bulls, blues, makos, threshers, and even outside of the cage with the mighty great white shark. And it can be done, although you have to pick your moments. So you go when the water is very clear, you don't go at dusk and dawn when they're at their most active, and you go in a cage first so you can watch their movements. And if you see a shark that has its pectoral fins drop down below it, and its back arched, its mouth open, its gills billowing, and its movements are erratic or angular, then that one means business, or it's being territorial, or it's potentially in predatory mode, and so you stay inside the cage. But if all of those things are reversed, I feel as safe swimming alongside a great white shark as I might do swimming alongside dolphins or seals. Sounds crazy, but I'm still here, and so are all my crew, and we have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours underwater with these extraordinary animals, and only ever come away with a sense of deep privilege and honour and respect. Sadly, that is not the case for sharks all over the world. This is one of the most threatened groups of animals on the planet. So it's very difficult to figure out exactly how many sharks are being taken. We estimate 73 million sharks are being killed each year for their fins alone. So for shark fin soup, which is primarily served in Indochina, Indonesia, China, but even right here in the UK. And the rest of the body is often just discarded back into the water, and it is just wasted. It's the equivalent of taking a cow's tail and then throwing away the whole of the rest of the body and just using that. It is the most wasteful form of fishing out there. In total, we might be taking 250 billion, 250 million sharks from the world's oceans every single year. It is a number that simply cannot be sustained. If we carry on like this, sharks will not be around for my youngsters to have an opportunity to swim with. And it's been one of the greatest things that I've got to do in my life. It has brought me more joy and more wonder in the natural world than just about anything else. And that's why I'm supporting a whole range of different shark charities, particularly Bite Back, who are great friends of mine, set up by wonderful Graham in his bedroom, and he's turned it into a charity that's making real difference. He's an inspiration to any of you out there who really want to make a change and make a difference in wildlife. So they have numerous campaigns, including Hacked Off, also the Shark Trust and the Manta Trust. There's lots and lots of wonderful organisations out there doing their bit to try and make sure that we don't lose sharks from our planet. And it's also something that we can all get involved in as well. I think that social media and new media all have a powerful role to play in convincing people that just indiscriminate, catastrophic slaughter of sharks and using them purely for their fins just doesn't make any sense. And surely our oceans would be worse off without them. So, next time you see an image like this, please don't see a malicious man-eating monster. Instead, see a glorious creature whose ancestors have been around for 400, maybe 500 million years. See a pregnant mother that may not reach sexual maturity until older than we as human beings may be. An animal that is just peacefully going about its business, swimming around as it has done for millions of years, and without her, our seas would be much, much poorer places. Thank you all very much.
Welcome back to the show. We've had an interesting bit in the interim. We have got a slight technical hitch, which we're just working out now, but it's a technical hitch which has been worked out by an astronaut. So that gives me, the difference between there's a technical hitch with Josie and there's a technical hitch with Chris Hadfield, and it's just not merely because I've worked with Josie for 20 years, but I have confidence in the astronaut frame of mind. And if any of you did see Sea Shambles 2 years ago, which was such a lot of fun, I should mention that Chris was there. We also had Rusty Schweikart from Apollo 9, who's someone that I really, if you don't know about Rusty's work and what Rusty did after Apollo 9, It is so. There was a speech that he gave at a kind of gathering, which I think was it was described as Lindisfarne, not the one off the coast of the northeast of England, but one which was, I think, somewhere near Long Island. It was the most incredible speech about that moment in Apollo 9 as he was floating in space, and he started to get that sense of this next stage of being human. If you get a chance, if you find it, he made the speech in 1970. He's made many brilliant speeches since then. Go and look up the stuff for Rusty Schweiker. I'll also mention, by the way, that much like when we did Space Shambles with Chris Hadfield, we also have lasers tonight. We have not let you down. There will be lasers at the end of this evening. And now I think we're technically adept again. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome. You can hear one of the computers actually being mended at one side of him, and there is another one working at the same time. Please, that's wonderful. That was like a jingle that says hello. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to his front room, into your front room, Chris Hadfield.
Thank you very much, Robin. It's good to see you both, and good to see everybody who's online. I'm just bringing up my presentation on my laptop because, as I said, it had a blue screen of death. Why don't we just chat for 1 minute as this comes up here, Rob, if you like, and then because then I'll be able to see the slides as I run through. So just a second.
Well, because we were talking beforehand about this, about some of those incredible, many of those incredible images that you took from the ISS, and some people still don't know about the term the overview effect, but that effect of looking back at your home planet, and you've written so beautifully about it. Was it instantaneous the first time that you looked out of that window? Obviously, or is there a point where that effect suddenly becomes magnified?
I think you have to be receptive to it, Robin. If you're brain full, if you're busy doing something, if you're totally preoccupied, and then you move into an incredible set of circumstances, sometimes it takes takes some time to pull your attention away and notice where you are and really catch the nuance of the difference of where you just were and where you are now. And the opportunity to accelerate from a normal life sitting still on the surface to suddenly going 5 miles a second to crossing the Atlantic Ocean, in the time it takes to drink a glass of water, or to go around the entire world in an hour and a half. You can easily become still quite superficial about it. It's just, wow, okay, but I'm busy. But so the first time around the world, it's hard to see much beyond what you've already imagined. There's an Alice in Wonderland feel to it all. You have to somehow open up your mind to be able to accept where you are. But the second time around the world, you start to get a sense of this looking glass, and then the third and the fifth and the 10th, and you become more attuned to it and better at it. It's maybe the difference between driving to a park and having 10 minutes in the park and going and staying in the park for 3 months, or living in a redwood forest. And so I think it's something, maybe your minds would be more attuned than mine, so that you could get yourself comfortable with it more quickly. But I found that I was still absorbing it and becoming more affected by the place that I was, even on the 200 and whatever it was. No, how many days did I spend in space? I don't know. But the 2,600th orbit was just maybe even more impactful than my first and my second. I think, like a lot of the world, you need to give it time. And I put together some pictures and slides for everybody. If you want, we can just run through those. Trent, I don't know if you can bring them up or not, sir, please. But it's Sea Shambles, and are people looking at those images now? Okay, great. So there should be an image of the world, and we live, obviously, as I was just saying, going around it in 90 minutes, we live in a water world. 70% of it is covered in water, and you're almost impatient for the Earth when you're on board a spaceship, because it's forever the water. Someone would actually at the window yell, "Dirt alert," when we were coming up towards a landmass, because, oh good, we're not just looking at the ocean again. But the oceans and the waters are so incredibly important in life itself. If you go to the next slide, please, Trent, here's sort of an artist representation of the primordial Earth, maybe 4 billion years ago, covered in water, but landmass is still boiling up like, I don't know, like Czerski or Hawaii is right now. But life wouldn't exist if it weren't for the depth of our oceans. The earliest record we can find of life, and I don't know if that video will play or not if you go to the next image, Trent, but deep where the energy is pouring out of the world into the thickness of the salt water, that's where tube worms live, vast colonies that have nothing to do with the air or even sometimes with oxygen. It's the incredible fertile little spot of the energy pouring out from the core of the world and mixing with the fertile environment of water itself that allows those little colonies to exist. And if you go to the next image, some of the oldest fossils we have from the entire planet, they're actually here in Canada where I live, up on the edge of Hudson Bay, but they are of those early colonies from just under 4 billion years ago. And if it weren't for the blanket of what is essentially life-giving water around our planet, there may well have been no life at all on Earth. Next, actually, I think the next one's a video, Trent. But I've actually had a chance to get into a one-man submarine that can go thousands of feet down underwater and look down at some of the primeval early types of life that have existed because of the environment of being in the water. In this case, stromatolites, which are a very strange coral kind of formation, which we found from 4 billion years ago in northern Australia. But we don't really, next slide, we don't really have very much water on Earth. I'm sure lots of you have seen this graphic of a dry Earth where all of the water that we know of is put as a more familiar ball on the surface. And that big ball that you're looking at, that's all the seawater. And the little ball is all the fresh water. And the little tiny ball that you might not even be able to see, that's the accessible fresh water in our lakes and rivers. So water is both a scarce resource and an extremely visible resource and an absolutely necessary one on Earth. But it's also been necessary for the development of us. And next slide, please. This is sort of the history of human exploration over the last, 2 million years. And if you look, there's red line on there, and then there's an area that's yellow, an area that's sort of mustard. Go to the next slide, please. This early hominid could walk upright, so erect, Homo erectus. And they were around for a couple of million years. And everywhere on that map that was yellow, Homo erectus went to. Next slide. But if you look at it, you can see Homo erectus was not a seafaring hominid. Everywhere that Homo erectus went, they walked. And if you look where there's mustard on the map, sort of in Central Europe or Southern Europe. Next slide, please. That's where some of our ancestors, the Neanderthals, traveled. They also were completely stopped by the shoreline. They hadn't figured out how to become a seafaring species. The sea was not an enabler. It was a wall to them. And next slide, please. It wasn't until our inventiveness that we started to be able to actually use the seas as a method of exploration. Next slide, I think it's us. That's a ridiculous drawing of Homo sapiens there. But Homo sapiens is everywhere on that map that went red. But if you noticed, we didn't get into the Americas until about 18,000 years ago. And that's because of another trait of the seas, and that is that water exists in all 3 states on Earth. It's water vapor in the air and liquid on the oceans and ice. And up until quite recently, next slide, please, because of perturbations in our orbit and the way the world wobbles as it tips, sometimes the poles don't get nearly as much sunlight, and so the ice doesn't melt in the summer times, and we get ice ages. And next slide, please, Trent. Up until, 20,000 years ago, the ice had advanced so far down that imagine if you were that long-haired Homo sapiens and you'd come all the way across Siberia and managed to get to Alaska. There was a wall of impenetrable water, frozen, again, stymieing all human exploration. And next, please, Trent. It wasn't until it started to melt because of the natural Earth's orbital cycles about maybe 17 or 18,000 years ago that the coast opened up enough that we could start to come down. And then we erupted into the Americas and have been here steadily ever since. Go to the next video, if you would, please.
How can you see
But again,
the atmosphere?
we were still entirely
The answer is blowing in the
land-based.
wind. Tiny particles known as
Being
aerosols
able
are
to
carried by
harness
the
the
air
oceans
around the globe.
has been
This visualization
absolutely
uses data from
necessary in the
NASA
development of
satellites
civilization.
combined with our knowledge
The
of physics and
currents and the
meteorology
winds, it's
to
hugely
track
daunting
three
and dangerous.
aerosols:
People
dust,
still
smoke,
die in
and sea
boats
salt.
every day. But it wasn't until
Sea
we could
salt,
find
shown
a
here
way
in
to
blue,
harness
is
the
picked up
natural
by
currents
winds
of the air
passing
and
over
water
the ocean.
that we could really
As
thrive.
tropical
And
storms and
next,
hurricanes
please.
form.
And one of the greatest technological innovations I know of is this little spaceship here, which the Vikings came up with maybe about 1,200 years ago, their longboat. And it has propulsion from natural sources, from the wind, and from engines, or at least big-shouldered Vikings on board who are rowing on those oars. But with that combination of reliable transportation from wind and brawn, next, please, Trent, they not only sailed up and down the coast, but they now, for the first time, with confidence, could start to leave the sight of land. And they went across to the Faroes and they settled in Iceland. And then a little over 1,000 years ago, they settled in Greenland. And almost exactly 1,000 years ago, they rediscovered North America. But they hadn't gotten there on foot. They managed to get there in a matter of a week or two on the oceans. Their ship was all right. But next, please. About 400 years later, Henry the Navigator and his crew down in Portugal came up with this ship, which is called the Caravel, which could not only beat the wind, but could sail into shallow waters. And suddenly, the oceans were even more open to us. And go to the next one, please. And suddenly, in the late 1400s, in 1486, we sailed around Africa for the first time. It opened the East. It opened the Spice Islands. It opened trade. And then in 1496 or 1492, Columbus, of course, sailed across to the Bahamas. 1496, John Cabot made it over to Newfoundland. And 1517, Magellan made it all the way around the world. Our ships had opened up the entire planet to our ability to move at will and trade. So where are we now on the seas? Go to the next one, please. We've pretty much conquered ocean travel. You know, we've been to both poles. It's taking a sea voyage is pretty reliable. But the real oceans are the ones above our heads. And I think they look as daunting to us now as the waters did to Homo erectus. But, you know, just in my lifetime, we started to conquer them. When I was born, no one had ever flown in space. You know, I'm older than human spaceflight. But we've been flying in space since I was, 2 with Gagarin. We've had people living on the space station continuously on that ship for the last almost 20 years. But how far can these ships take us? We're still, Viking longboat design for space travel. If you look at maybe the most advanced ship we've ever imagined, go to the next one, Trent. We should be looking at the USS Enterprise. If you remember that early Star Trek, and it's coming back with the Star Trek Voyager, when they were regularly cruising around, they'd go like warp 1. And when they wanted to get somewhere efficiently, warp 3, maybe warp 5, warp 9, when Spock or Kirk was lashing Scotty and trying to really get somewhere, warp 9. I think you probably know, but is the speed of light. Warp 2 is the speed of light cubed. So like 8 times the speed of light. Warp 3, 27 times the speed of light. So warp 9 is 981, 729. 729 times the speed of light. So warp 9, fastest we can even imagine on a science fiction show. How far will that actually take us? And if we wanted to go to the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, and we had a USS Enterprise, and Scotty whipped it up to top speed, it would still take us 2 days to get to Proxima Centauri. But to get to the center of our galaxy would be 34 years. That's how, they only were on a 5-year mission. They didn't go anywhere. They just sailed up and down the coast. So where are we really going to get to? next, the fastest thing that we think we can actually construct is this thing here, this sailing ship called the Vasimir, and it uses the acceleration of ions in order to push things out the back, magnetoplasmic rocket, and it might get us to Mars in a month. And that suddenly, if we can build that, get a concentrated enough power source, then we will have switched from dugout canoes, which we're currently using, through something like the Viking longboat, or maybe even some of the steamers that we use. And it will allow us to populate at least our own solar system. Because, just to wrap up, next please, out on the fringes of our solar system, there is still water. And we think some of the moons of Jupiter and Saturn have more water than Earth does. And they have heat at their cores. In fact, if you look at this image of Enceladus, water, salty water from Enceladus is spraying out into space. We've driven a ship through that spray and measured what the various contents are. And if they have heat, and they have had for millions and millions of years, and they have salt water, maybe there are tube worms wiggling underneath the ice of Enceladus. Why wouldn't there be? And so in that continued discovery, it's that leapfrogging of what we currently consider to be an impenetrable wall of something that keeps us from our current mode of transportation, the inventiveness of our ability to come up with some new vehicle to surmount it, and then the exploration and discovery, and then incorporation into society that brings, much as it has in conquering the seas of the world.
That's amazing. Chris, I've got a question for you, because one of the things that, it's linked to what you're saying about this continual voyage of discovery. But when I read your book, An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, I happened to be reading at the same time a story of Pacific voyaging. And it was really striking to me that there were paragraphs in there, even though, as you say, the technology was completely different, because you're talking about double-hulled canoes and the International Space Station, but the human problems were the same. And there's this fascinating thing of the technology keeps going, but the human exploration thing is still the same. And I wondered if you had some comment on this human drive and the fact that the human bit does stay the same.
People often ask me, when are they going to let regular people fly in space? And it just makes me laugh. Like what? I was born as an astronaut or something? We're all just a bunch of regular people, and we tell bad jokes and have bad days, and we're just trying to make the best of where we are and not squander the opportunity of being in that magnificent set of circumstances. And we feel, therefore, a shared kinship, I think, with the explorers of old. It's relatively similar. There, you call it a double-hulled sailing ship. That's what the space station is. It's got an inner hull and then an outer armored layer. And you're essentially a little bubble of humanity on an endless, barely navigable sea. And the fact that the Earth is always right there in your window, you're really struck by the fact that you're just continuing the exploration of all who have gone before. And when I look at, even as different a hominid as Homo erectus, I'm sure they felt largely the same. They woke up one day in their little encampment, and one of their teenagers said, "That's it, I'm out of here. I'm tired of you two." And they walked over the next hill, and they became an explorer. And with that, over 1 million years, they spread over much of Europe and Asia. And those needs, those human needs to leave where we are and go discover things for ourselves, and only be limited by the inventions of our own imagination, to me, that is as old as humanity is itself. And we're only just now applying it to the point where we can maybe use it to start to directly go see the limitlessness of everywhere else. I don't hear you, Robin.
Yeah, Robin, are you muted?
On mute. I've been listening to everyone else. I wondered how you felt about when we did a show about Apollo 11 for Monkey Cage. Rusty Schweikart was saying for him the most important part of the Apollo missions was actually Apollo 8, taking the Earthrise image. That was more important than a human being standing on the moon. And I wondered how you feel about that.
Well, partially, it depends, I guess, which transatlantic voyage you think was the most important. Was Columbus's first trip across the most important voyage or not? Or was it his second, or was it, some subsequent one where some other level of human awareness developed? And for a lot of people, I'm sure it was a novelty. It was just, hey, a novelty. How about that? Look at that. We can sail that way and there's dirt over there and come back. But I'm kind of busy with my own life right here. Intriguingly enough, England, the United Kingdom, after Cabot, John Cabot, had sailed in 1496 and discovered that there was another continent. And because what was it, King Henry at the time, I think, he'd said you can claim any of the newfound land for England, and he had called it very creatively Newfound Land, and so Newfoundland. It wasn't almost a century until the follow-on sort of developmental travel really happened. So, yeah, we remember the date because it was the first, but was it really the most significant? I tend to agree with Rusty. We remember, Columbus. It's almost becomes like a nursery rhyme, and we remember Apollo 11 because that was the first. Who knows who stepped down on the next ladder on Apollo 12? I do, but most people don't. And Apollo 17 was far and away the most scientifically significant of the moon landings, but very few people could name the crew of Apollo 17. So I think part of it is the difference between actual space exploration and just space entertainment. And I think Columbus and Cabot, they were significant, but they were more entertaining, I think, than they were in actual societal impact of the time. And I know that people remember Apollo 11, but the vast majority of work and the true self-awareness of the planet didn't just happen in that brief moment when Neil stepped down off the ladder. It's nice to have something signal to remind ourselves of it, but like so many voyages, it's the unheralded ones that really affect our lives.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for joining us again this year. Hopefully next year we'll be back doing Space Shambles as well. And I think the next gig might be the next gig with you in Toronto. I might not be gigging until then. The diary's almost empty. But thank you so much for joining us. And I highly recommend everyone, by the way, the all of Chris's books are great. The images that he took from the International Space Station are really remarkable and do just give you a different sense of what this planet is. So I highly recommend anyone getting hold of that as well. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you,
Nice
Chris.
to talk to you both. Thank you.
I think now we're going to go. This is one of these interesting ones where sometimes you have to have a long chat about how an introduction is going to be done. And this is exactly this experience because Jim Moray, who is a brilliant musical creator and singer and songwriter, and also uses all manner of intriguing things sometimes to create his music as well, and something of an archivist of musical technology. And he is going to do I think it's a pirate song, isn't it, Helen?
Yes, I think it is. But it's also about the harshness of the sea, and I think our picture of what it's like to be a seafarer is very tied up. I mean, we have this picture of it being hard, right? It's difficult, and pirates have this association of being, cutlasses and parrots and general unpleasantness, but actually life at sea, even without pirates, was just hard. And so this song, we forget, Chris was saying that we move on from one technology to the next, and it becomes the next generation takes it for granted. And Jim's song here really does look back at when sea travel was not taken for granted, and comfort certainly wasn't anywhere to be seen.
And there is also, when I was talking about the intro, we were talking about the fact that the Women's Institute, this may be an apocryphal tale of there was going to be a talk by a man about piracy and pirates, and apparently that particular group thought it would be fun to dress up in that traditional Long John Silver pirate way, and then actually found out it was someone who had been kidnapped, and it was late 20th century piracy, and it was one of those awkward moments. So hopefully we've papered over any possible awkward moments. Here is Jim Moray.
listen for a moment, lad, and hear me tell my tale. Overseas from England I was condemned to sail. The jury found me guilty, and says the judge says he, oh, for life, Jim Jones, I'm sending you across the raging sea. But take my tip before you ship on board the Iron Gang. Don't get too gay on Botany Bay, or else you'll surely hang. Or else you'll hang, he says he, and after that, Jim Jones, oh, it's high upon the gallows tree, the crows will pick your bones. But there's no chance for mischief there, remember what I say. They'll flog the poaching out of you out there on Botany Bay. But let the rain come down in torrents and the wind come up in gales. I'd rather die in misery than go to New South Wales. But the rain, it came in torrents, and the pirates came along, and the soldiers all on board our ship were full 500 strong. We fired on them until we drove that pirate ship away. Oh, I'd rather go on a pirate ship than go to Botany Bay. Day and night, the irons clang, and like poor galley slaves, we'll toil and toil, and when we're done, we'll fill dishonoured graves. By and by, I'll break my chains, and into the bush I'll go, and I'll join the great bush rangers there, Jack Donahue and Co. And then one dark night, when everything is silent in the town, we'll kill the tyrants one by one. We'll shoot those floggers down to give the law a little shock. Remember what I say. Oh, they'll soon regret they sent Jim Jones in chains to Botany Bay.
Thank you so much, Jim Moray, and find out more about the work that he does, because as I said before, as well as producing a lot of interesting bands, he Art Brut, amongst others, which is a fantastic band. Jim also produces and creates wonderful music. Now, Helen, last time that not the last time we did a gig together, because we've done quite a few gigs together, but the thing that people love hearing about is there are, amongst all of the different things that you've collected from the sea, both stories and also the aquatic ephemera, there is one thing in particular that people have been intrigued by.
Yeah, so as a physicist, I want to talk about the physical things, and there's some things that it doesn't matter what you say about them, people are just fascinated, and it's all they remember. So yes, and it is poo. Whale poo, precisely. And the thing is that whale poo is genuinely really important in the ocean. Poo is important in the ocean. And it's, people think physicists, think about, I don't know, great thoughts about the universe or something, but poo matters. And it matters very briefly, just because the top layer of the ocean is where sunlight is. But sunlight's only any good if you've got some nutrients to use the sunlight to build into something else. And so sunlight's at the top. This is great. But then what happens is that as things live and die, they tend to fall down. So all the useful atoms, the nutrients and nitrates and all that kind of, they fall down. They fall away from the sunlight, which is a problem. And the thing the whales do, which is incredibly useful, along with other marine mammals, is they feed down below, but then they have to come up to breathe. So they come up to the surface, and at the same time as breathing, because, the pressure changes a bit, they poo. And the thing is that the poo are little packages of iron and nitrate rich material that are then brought back to the surface ocean, and they can fertilize things at the top all over again. So it's actually a word for this. It's the whale pump, pumping carbon and nitrates and iron all the way back up to the surface, so it can fall down again and fertilize things. And so whales are never competing with fishermen. They're actually just fertilizing everything from the top. And so you can talk about poo, and people laugh because everyone loves giggling at poo, but in the ocean it's a really serious thing, that the system just wouldn't function without it. And the whales do a lot of pooing. It's really important.
Well, I am not certain, because to be honest, I've never got around to reading it, whether whale poo makes it into Herman Melville's whale classic. But tonight we have an excerpt, because one day we'll do a marathon Andy Kaufman style reading of this. But for the time being, we have an excerpt from Moby Dick. And just for that, I'll just mention again the tip jar at the bottom of here, and for Albert Hall, for the Ocean Charities, for the Stay at Home Festival, and also, if you can, if subscribe to Cosmic Shambles at patreon.com. We'd use all of that money just to make stuff like this show that you're seeing now, and we have thousands of hours of other stuff that we have done in many different directions of art and science. So thank you very much, everyone who is donating. But now this is a proper, it's like the kind of the celebrity Christmas record breakers in terms of the cast that we have for this particular excerpt from Moby Dick. So now get ready for our all-star interpretation of Moby Dick.
Steering northeastward from the Crozets, we fell in with vast meadows of brits, the minute yellow substance upon which the right whale largely feeds. For leagues and leagues undulated round us, so that we seemed to be sailing through boundless fields of ripe and golden wheat.
And on the second day, numbers of right whales were seen, who, secure from the attack of a sperm whaler like the Pequod, with open jaws sluggishly swam through the brit, which, adhering to the fringing fibers of that wondrous Venetian blind in their mouths, was in that manner separated from the water that escaped at the lips.
As morning mowers who side by side slowly and seethingly advanced their sides through the long wet grass of marshy meads, even so these monsters swam, making a strange, grassy cutting sound and leaving behind them endless swathes of blue upon the yellow sea. That part of the sea known among whalemen as the Brazil Banks does not bear that name as the banks of Newfoundland do, because of there being shallows and soundings there, but because of this remarkable meadow-like appearance caused by the vast drifts of grit continually floating in these latitudes, where the right whale is often chased.
But it was only the sound they made as they parted the brit which all reminded one of mowers. Seen from the mastheads, especially when they paused and were stationary for a while, their vast black forms looked more like lifeless masses of rock than anything else. And as in the great hunting countries of India, the stranger at a distance will sometimes pass on the plains recumbent elephants without knowing them to be such, taking them for bare, blackened elevations of the soil. Even so, often with him, who for the first time beholds this species of the leviathans of the sea. And even when recognized at last, Their immense magnitude renders it very hard, really, to believe that such bulky masses of overgrowth can possibly be instinct in all parts, with the same sort of life that lives in a dog or a horse.
Indeed, in other respects, you can hardly regard any creatures of the deep with the same feelings that you do those of the shore. For though some old naturalists have maintained that all creatures of the land are of their kind in the sea, and though taking a broad general view of the thing, this may very well be, yet coming to specialties, where, for example, does the ocean furnish any fish that in disposition answers to the sagacious kindness of the dog? The accursed shark alone can in any generic respect be said to bear comparative analogy to him.
But though to landsmen in general the native inhabitants of the seas have ever been regarded with emotions unspeakably unsocial and repelling, though we know the sea to be an everlasting terra incognita, so that Columbus sailed over numberless unknown worlds to discover his one superficial western one, though by vast odds the most terrific of all mortal disasters have immemorially and indiscriminately befallen tens and hundreds of thousands of those who have gone upon the waters, though but a moment's consideration will teach that however baby man may brag of his science and skill, and however much in a flattering future that science and skill may augment, yet forever and forever to the crack of doom the sea will insult and murder him and pulverize the stateliest, stiffest frigate he can make. Nevertheless, by the continual repetition of these very impressions, man has lost that sense of the full awfulness of the sea, which aboriginally belongs to it.
The first boat we read of floated on an ocean that with Portuguese vengeance had whelmed a whole world without leaving so much as a widow. That same ocean rolls now. That same ocean destroyed the wrecked ships of last year. Yea, foolish mortals, Noah's flood is not yet subsided. 2/3 of the fair world it yet covers.
Wherein differ the sea and land, that a miracle upon one is not a miracle upon the other. Preternatural terrors rested upon the Hebrews when under the feet of Korah and his company the live ground opened and swallowed them up forever. Yet not a modern sun ever sets, but in precisely the same manner the live sea swallows up ships and crews.
But not only is the sea such a foe to man who is an alien to it, but it is also a fiend to its own offspring, worse than the Persian host who murdered his own guests, sparing not the creatures which itself has spawned. Like a savage tigress that tossing in the jungle overlays her own cubs, so the sea dashes even the mightiest whales against the rocks and leaves them side by side with the split wrecks of ships. No mercy, no power, but its own controls it, panting and snorting like a mad battle steed that has lost its rider. The masterless ocean overruns the globe.
Consider the subtleness of the sea, how its most dreaded creatures glide underwater, unapparent for the most part, and treacherously hidden beneath the loveliest tints of azure. Consider also the devilish brilliance and beauty of many of its most remorseless tribes, as the dainty embellished shape of many species of sharks. Consider once more the universal cannibalism of the sea, all whose creatures prey upon each other, carrying on an eternal war since the world began.
Consider all this, and then turn to this green, gentle, and most docile earth. Consider them both, the sea and the land. Do you not find a strange analogy to something in yourself? For as this appalling ocean surrounds the verdant land, so in the soul of man there lies one insular Tahiti, full of peace and joy but encompassed by all the horrors of a half-known life. God keep thee. Push not off from that isle, thou canst never return.
There we are. That was Moby Dick, and that was ended there by Dunja Lavrova, who's an amazing violinist and who has often been at our shows, our live shows that we've done, 9 Lessons and Carols for Curious People, and the final act you saw there was Cobie Smulders from How I Met Your Mother, and also an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. in numerous Avengers movies. And before that, I will now run through the list which I have before me of everyone that you saw. You saw Sarah Pascoe, Helen Zaltzman, Joshua Idhan. Look up his work, Ben Ince, really amazing what he's doing. Ben Baily Smith, Katy Brand, Sam West, David McAlmont, Natalie Haynes, Luke Wright, and Reece Shearsmith, who used some of his lockdown time to make basically the environment that he was in. That was specially constructed for us. Reece is always a wonderful person, as they all are. Thank you so much for everyone who gave their time. And I'll mention again that Cobie Smulders as well. One of the reasons that she appeared is also because she is a patron of the Oceana charity. So look up the Oceana charity and you'll find out what she's a patron of and the kind of work that it's doing. Now, our next guest, obviously we couldn't leave him off, is my Infinite Monkey cohort, Brian Cox, and I will just mention as well that the Infinite Monkey Cage is coming back. We've recorded the first episode of the new series. I hope it's going to be available sometime this week. We had an amazing, we did the End of the Universe. We've started a series with the End of the Universe, and that was Katie Mack and Brian Green, and also on top of that we also had Steve Martin and Eric Idle. To have Steve Martin and Eric Idle on Monkey Cage was an absolute treat. So thank you very much, and here is someone we spoke to a couple of days ago about his incident with an octopus. Here is Professor Brian Cox. Right, Brian, my first question for you is, we've had a very long conversation, not just on Monkey Cage, but also in the back of the tour van about your relationship with a particular octopus, haven't we? So can you tell us a little bit about when you realised, it is, I mean, genuinely it is when you made a decision about your diet, didn't you? You went, I can no longer eat this creature.
Yeah, well, we were filming a series called Wonders of Life, and I was diving. We decided to film octopuses, and it was in Miami, in the sea off Miami. And I was diving, and we found an octopus, and we went down and we filmed it. And I just had a really interesting time with anyone who's been in the presence, particularly, I suppose, in the ocean, of an octopus, and it's hung around. Is you feel at least, and I'm sure it's true, that you're in the presence of an intelligence and a playful creature, and I spent quite a long time diving with it, and as you say, yeah, I'm not the kind of most, I eat pretty much everything. I'm not a vegetarian by any means. However, I did it was really a very powerful experience.
When it comes to us and dogs and pigs, all those brains came from the same sort of place. With an octopus, it's just a different way of having an intelligence, and yet it's having a look at you. And so, yeah, and of course they're fascinating creatures in all kinds of ways. They're adapted to a completely different environment. But it does say that we assume you have to go somewhere else to find interesting, novel, things. And actually, I mean, I'm going to bang the drum for the ocean, aren't I? But it is an alien environment, and we can go and visit it and meet the alien inhabitants who just have completely different priorities in their evolutionary history. So, yeah, I don't approve of eating octopus either.
No, very, very good point. I mean, if you go back, ancestors between us and the octopus is, so I think it's 400 million years ago. So it's something of that. So it may be even further back. So as Helen said, it was fascinating to me to learn about this animal, to see that the eyes were developed in a completely different way. I think that the light sensors in the eyes are very similar to the ones that we use in our clocks, in our internal clock, and vice versa. So there's the light sensors, the type of sensors that are in our internal clocks in mammals and human beings are used in the eyes of the octopus. So it's gone down a completely different evolutionary route. And as Helen said, that there was nothing that you could even begin to call intelligence in our common ancestor. So we split, and it's many hundreds of millions of years ago. And so it is an alien, in a sense. It's developed in an alien environment, completely independently of us, and that's why one of the reasons they're so fascinating.
And they're amazing. One of the most amazing things I've ever seen underwater, and I've spent weeks of my life effectively underwater working, is a hunting octopus at night. Because we think of their arms as being separate, octopus arms are all these separate things, but they have a membrane that can sort of join in the gaps a little bit, and it can change color. And when you watch a hunting octopus moving over a reef, this whole thing is pulsating in waves of color in the dark, right? The octopus can't see this because it's dark, and there's these waves of color, and this thing is moving over the rock, and it's the only thing you can think of is how alien it is. So, but it's yeah, I do wonder what they think about us. Of course, the thing about octopus is they're generally a solitary species. So they're not social in the same way that we are. There are a very small number of octopuses interacting with each other. So maybe if they'd become a social species, they'd be the clever ones on this planet instead of us.
Well, talking about that intelligence, Brian, I think that's we've done shows in the past about the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And Carl Sagan talks about the fact, that the sea holds, creatures of what appear to be incredible intelligence, and yet we still can't communicate. We can't communicate with the blue whale. What can we learn, about ideas of communicating with aliens beyond the planet Earth by looking at, as you said, the aliens that are within our seas?
Well, that was always, you're right. If you go back in the history of SETI, actually, we're fascinated by dolphins, and some of it was a kind of a strange, almost, an unusual fascination, I'd say, with dolphins. But it's true, I suppose, in a sense. You can see why they were attracted to that. If you take the view, and I don't think it's correct, but if you take the view that a dolphin, let's say, is as intelligent as we are, I think that it's not thought to be the case now. But if you take that view, then it is true that if you're trying, you can practice communicating with a similar level of intelligence, but that thinks in a very different way. I think that was one of the things, I think, in the 1960s and 70s, which I think Helen might comment on it. I think it's now broadly accepted dolphins are very clever, but they're not on our level by any means.
They haven't got opposable thumbs. I mean, they are a social species. A lot of their intelligence comes from communicating with each other and communicating in pods, and we see that they're distressed if if something happens to someone in the pod, the others will be distressed, and they are chattering all the time. If you're in the middle of a big pod of dolphins, they're gossiping that you can hear. They're so noisy because they're talking. They're not just sensing their environment, they're communicating with each other, constantly checking in with each other. And it's been found that dolphins effectively have their own name, so they all have a call which identifies them, and if you play the call of a dolphin that isn't in the pod at the moment, they'll all look for him. They go, oh, we haven't seen Fred for a while, where's he? So they are social in that way, but what they don't have, I guess, is the mechanical advantages that we have, hands and fingers and the need to use them. They might have evolved them if they hadn't done so fabulously well at swimming. But yeah, so they have some of our evolutionary drivers that have pushed us towards being an intelligent species, but not all of them. But they are social, and they very clearly are distressed. They unhappy and they play. So they're not to be underestimated.
I read of Paul Brox, who's written some very interesting books, but I was reading about a Norse dolphin god that would also then take human form and become very predatory, but had to wear a hat when doing that, because the one thing that would not become humanized would be the blowhole. So if you knock the hat off, you go, hang on a minute, you've got a blowhole. You're that Norse dolphin god, aren't you? What about the seas beyond the planet Earth? What do we know about seas on other planets?
Well, we know they exist, even in our solar system. So we're, I would say, convinced now. I think it is a fact that there's an ocean below the surface of Europa, which is Jupiter's icy moon. Pretty sure, saltwater ocean, with most likely, we think, geological activity on the floor of the ocean. And so the conditions that we think may have led to the origin of life on this planet, the transition from geochemistry to biochemistry that happened here, those conditions are present, we think, today on Europa. How long they've been present for, we're not sure. And this tends to be the big problem in astrobiology. So we know that Mars had oceans way back, but lost its atmosphere and lost most of its water. How long they persisted for, we're not sure. Same with Venus, actually. We pretty strongly suspect Venus had oceans on the surface, but a runaway greenhouse effect essentially destroyed the planet. So there are places, even Pluto. I mean, Pluto now, some of the recent results from the New Horizons spacecraft suggest there may be liquid water in pockets below the surface of Pluto. What's heating it is a very good question. It's probably maybe radioactivity in the core, which is responsible for half the Earth's inner heat today. Don't really know. So I think there's liquid water in pockets, not on the surface of objects in the solar system, but below the surface today. And you can speculate. I think most scientists would think that at best we'll see microbes there. I think there are very few scientists that think we'll see some kind of primitive worm-like things or something, multicellular organisms in the oceans of Europa. You never know, but I think I think it's probably disfavored.
But there's an interesting point there, which is about having a stable environment for life. And I think one of the things that isn't always appreciated is how important the oceans on Earth are for stabilizing conditions. Because if you've got water that can also become ice and can also become a gas, effectively, and also something with an extremely high heat capacity, which means you can chuck a lot of energy into it and its temperature doesn't change by very much. Basically, what you've got is something which makes it very hard for the entire planet to shift temperatures, because you give it a feedback loop. If it gets a bit too hot, there's a feedback that will push it back to being a bit cooler. And so an ocean isn't just important because that's where we think life might have evolved, and you know, so we look for an ocean because we might find life. It's also that the presence of an ocean, in the way that ours works on Earth, is a stabilizing influence, and that gives you the billions of years that it takes for evolution to get going. So our oceans are the defining feature of our planet, not because they're big and blue, but because if they weren't there, we wouldn't have a system, we wouldn't have this bubble, this engine of our planet that operates in such a stable way for such long periods of time. So I think oceans are, I think I've got this bee in my bonnet that they're underestimated in terms of their importance for running the engine of the planet. Like, the engine of Earth is its ocean. There is no doubt about that. It dominates everything else. And so having an ocean, if you want life, is useful for more than just being the place that life starts.
On another form of waterway, the canal. I was reading the other day, Brian, I don't know if you know much about this, that Mariner 4, when that, as far as I know, that was when the idea of Lowell's canals on Mars, etc., were no. There wasn't. It appears that there was not a civilization that built a network of canals. And I heard that there was still some sense that might have really stymied the further missions to Mars. That there was a point where once there was no sign of this, some people had this idea of civilization, it was going to become harder to fund. Have you heard any stories about that?
Well, I know it was a shock when we flew past Mars and saw that it's now a barren world. Actually, we rode back a little bit now, and the search for life below the surface on Mars is very much on again because we think there are pockets of liquid water below the surface. But at the time, as you said, it was possible to imagine that Mars was a living world. It's very difficult to see anything through a telescope. In fact, you see, anyone who's looked at it through a telescope, you see the ice caps, and you see markings that appear to shift on its surface, and you imagine there may be vegetation and there could be large animals there, right? You could imagine that. But when we flew past, it was a tremendous shock, to the point where I remember seeing an article from a speech from Lyndon Johnson, the president at the time, who was visibly shocked when he saw those results. And he said something like, it seems that there may be no second chance for us, at least in the solar system. And I thought that was fascinating, because you see an insight into someone. This is the height of the Cold War, right at the start of the Cold War, 1960s, before the Cuban Missile Crisis. And you see someone almost implicitly thinking there must be thousands, millions of worlds like Earth. That, you know, it just must have been in the consciousness somehow. It was in his mind because he wrote in a shocked way that this barren rock made him think twice about the value of our planet in a positive way. It's rather more valuable than I had thought, said the President of the United States when he sailed past Mars. So, yes, I think it was a tremendous revelation to people that that planet was so barren, more like our moon in many ways than Earth. As Helen said, what we do know is that water is certain. Surely you don't get spontaneous emergence of biology without water. It's a very weird and unique substance. The standard thing to say is if there's water and it's been there for long enough and in a stable enough sense, and there's geological activity, you might think you have a chance of biology being present. But we honestly don't know.
Thank you very much, Brian Cox. We're going to be back with more in a moment. Over to you, Helen.
Turn these lights on.
Hello, welcome back. There we go. As we mentioned when we introduced that clip, that was actually from a couple of days ago when I was chatting to Brian. Helen was chatting to Brian, and mentioned also the Infinite Monkey Cage should be back this week in some shape or form. We recorded a show on Wednesday about the end of the world with Brian Greene and Katie Mack and Eric Idle and Steve Martin. So that was a pretty exciting way to spend Wednesday evening. Now we promise you lasers, and the person who does the greatest lasers, I've seen him do lasers. In fact, I think when we did Space Shambles, he actually had Rusty Schweikart from Apollo 9 playing with the lasers as well. Please welcome our laser impresario, Seb Lee-Delisle. How are you doing, Seb?
Hey, I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm great, and we should say this is down in Brighton now. This is actually happening. What people can see is, and you've been now your laser projections. First of all, you've been doing these down in Brighton, different versions of them as well for the NHS. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There's a few laserists all over the country, but we're just putting our lasers to good use because obviously all our events have been cancelled. So we're just pointing our lasers at big buildings and making NHS signs.
Where will they be able to see this from? Where are the kind of vantage? I mean, obviously, don't leave your house, stay in your house. But if they are in a house or a block of flats, where are the blocks of flats where they can look out the window now and see this?
Well, the main tower block I like to project Sussex Heights is a big white building. It's pretty much in the centre of Brighton. So if you can see the north face of that, you should be able to see some graphics. I'm also projecting some sky beams into the sky. And that's given me this idea to make a new project. It's called Laser Light City. It's called Laser Light City. You can actually take control of these laser beams. Onto my website, lasers.me, you'll get all the links that you need. You'll get all the links to control these lasers. And if you're in Brighton, you can see them move around. And if you're not in Brighton, you can look on my Twitch.
Let's have a look. Hopefully, we can see these. Hopefully, people at home are seeing these on full screen. Can I find out, by the way, because obviously, what was your plan for when we were going to be inside the Albert Hall? Because it's such an interesting thing to see in, you know, an old building which was so beautifully kind of ornate with that 19th century history, to see that almost not necessarily clash of ideologies, but then when the lasers were there, it really worked, I thought.
And that was when we did it. I mean, obviously, the Space Shambles was like one of my career highlights, but we were planning something even bigger for Sea Shambles, and I was getting together. I think the last count we had like 14 lasers booked, 14 really massive lasers. We're going to fill up the entire space with them. I'm not sure. Am I allowed to talk about our exact plans? I think it might still happen at some point, right?
Well, hopefully. I mean, next year we hope that we'll be back with the Albert Hall with another Shambles.
But not Sea Shambles, so I can reveal what we were going to try, can I?
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so we were going to fill like the whole first tier with like a laser plane with like waves on, so it would feel like everyone in the stalls was underwater.
Which is just brilliant. I love that. As someone who studies breaking waves and bubbles, that's kind of my dream way of seeing the Royal Albert Hall. Especially if you could have made a few, fish and bubbles. Were bubbles on your things to make to put?
I think bubbles was someone else.
Be very careful with what you're about to say, because our friendship might be just on rocky ground here.
Oh, really? Oh, I didn't realise.
Make sure there's bubbles.
Okay, sure. I'll do all the bubbles. Well, I did program some jellyfish to put on the building. I might as well switch to that as well. We're here. I can't move too away from the living room. I've the signal, but let's have a look. So at the moment, you can see hearts rising up. I turn that on, then they become jellyfish. Sea Shambles, an ocean-themed graphic.
See, that's what I always love about technology as well. This happened when many years ago we were doing a show and we were doing a live link up with the Large Hadron Collider. It was just after the kind of some very exciting evidence about, the Higgs field and the Higgs boson. And we were talking about cutting edge technology, this incredible technology, but getting a link up to actually work, actually just getting a simple. And in the same way, you have done this incredible work of lasers there across Brighton, but actually getting the Wi-Fi to work is a totally separate issue.
I am completely slamming it with like the Twitch stream and all of my other various bits. In fact, I turned the Twitch stream off temporarily, so I'll turn it back on again after this. But yeah, I'm certainly hammering my network right now.
What I love about your jellyfish is that they're almost like jellyfish in the ocean really do fluoresce. They really do produce bioluminescence. You've got your jellyfish projected in the dark. Actually, if you can see well enough in the ocean, that is what jellyfish look like for real. Yeah. And I love that you've recreated that with lasers.
I think it would be really fun to do like a whole aquarium of laser animals. Like, because there's so many fluorescent animals, right? So many deep sea animals that fluoresce. And I think lasers would be a really good way to see it. We could call it Laser Aquarium.
And the biggest eye in the ocean is the giant squid, I think, which is big, so big because it's sensitive enough to see these tiny little tendrils of light, to see the tiny light that's there. So we can have your laser aquarium, but we need a great big eye looking in at it from the side, just to freak everyone out, because why not?
Well, I promise next year we'll do Shambles Safari. Okay, we've done Sea Shambles. We've done. So this allows you to do whatever you wish to create with your lasers.
I've got to come up with some sort of safari-themed lasers now, don't I? I've got a year to think about it.
Oh man, that is so. Thank you so much for doing. Every time that you've created something for any of the shows that I've seen, it is always just absolutely beautiful and quite overpowering. So I hope those of you who are in Brighton are able to see this, really getting the effect of it. But it's great just to watch it on the screen. So thank you very much, Seb.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
Thanks,
see you soon.
Nice to see you.
Let's have a look at those lasers again there. Now we'll keep those up on screen just for a little bit, just to see what's going on. I hope you've been enjoying, by the way. This is it's been a lot of fun to do, and it's have done so much work, and Joe as well, and loads of other people who have been. Everything is kind of behind the scenes in some way because we're not on stage, but all of the different people who've worked to put this together. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope we've still got a couple of things. We are trying as much as possible to keep making things while we can't all gather together as an audience, because it's always such a lovely audience that we get for all these shows as well, and there's so many interesting conversations that happen afterwards. And so I hope you've been enjoying what you've seen, because it's been very exciting to have the guests that we've had as well. And I will now mention for the final time as well, don't forget the tip jar that is somewhere on your screen. I think it should be down there. And also for those of you who can support us via patreon.com, as I said, we throw back all the money into just making stuff all the time. And in fact, Helen, you've just done with the Gravity.
With ESA, yes, we were invited by ESA to go, and they have these zero gravity flights where you can have microgravity for about 22 seconds. And ESA invited us along, Cosmic Shambles, to go and cover them and to look at the science on board those planes and to look at what these planes are doing, because it is completely bonkers. And so we did that. That was funded by Patreon money. We're very grateful to our Patreon supporters. And the videos themselves will be out from the 20th of May onwards. So yes, I was floating in microgravity microgravity, and I got to do somersaults, and there was science as well. So what more could you possibly want? But it was funded, but Patreon is a really important part of letting us do those things, and we do want to keep doing them. So we do appreciate any support you can give us.
And hopefully none of the front rooms or attic rooms that you've actually seen us sitting in have made you think, wow, these people have a lot of money. Anyway, so this is mainly a shipwreck. You will have seen in the opening credits, we had one of our guests, who's someone who we regularly have as a guest, is the brilliant Grace Petrie. Now, unfortunately, Grace, some of you might know, on Friday did I'm going to get drunk with my flatmate Ben and sing all of the 26 songs that I sang over the previous month. So since then, she has not had a voice. She's lost her voice. And so Grace is not doing the gig, but instead we have someone, I mentioned before about the wonderful Crabs books. There's Crab's Moon. Someone who actually sent me this copy here of Guyan Smith's non-crab-based book, Locusts by Guyan Smith. That was sent to me by a really incredible musician who some of you will know from the Soft Boys, from Robin Hitchcock and the Egyptians, from his work with so many other people, including work with REM. And Robin said, it's okay, I will do a song for you. And a few years ago, in fact, we talked about this at the Stay at Home Festival. I think about 2 weeks ago, I did a Stay at Home Festival with Michael Legg and Owen Parker and Robin Hitchcock. And we talked about the time that with Robin, we put on at 1 o'clock in the morning at a festival a live, entirely improvised operatic jazz version of the Giant Killer Crab story, and it certainly was nothing more than avant-garde in terms of how avant-garde you can get in a festival-based meadow. So here, ladies and gentlemen, is Robin Hitchcock with and I'm not sure what song he's actually, I think Robin Hitchcock, I will just double check, I've got it somewhere. Oceanside. Robin Hitchcock is doing Oceanside. Thank you so much for joining us at the last minute, and also Grace Petrie, I hope you get your voice back very, very soon. Here is Robin Hitchcock.
Hey Robin, thanks for having me on the programme. This comes to you from deep far inland in Nashville, Tennessee. Wishing you all the best and all the waves for your ocean programme. Here we go.
All draped with seaweed, and the deep blue ocean rolling by. Maybe I will find today, maybe I will lose tomorrow. Gonna rock onto the ocean side. side.
Thank you so much for doing that, Robin Hitchcock. Robin Hitchcock is a really great musician, and also if you are a fan of the work of Jonathan Demme, and you should be, as well as making a brilliant film called Storefront Hitchcock, in which Robin just played a live set in a storefront in New York. Robin also crops up in The Manchurian Candidate as a strange, silent, enigmatic man, and is also the wedding band in Rachel's Getting Married. So thank you very much for doing that, Robin. And that brings us pretty much, we're quite close to the end of the show now. So thank you, everyone who's watched, and thank you to everyone who's taken part, and thank you to Trent and Melinda and Joe and everyone else who has made this possible. I'll remind you again, the tip jar, patreon.com in particular, for Cosmic Shambles. If you are able to subscribe to us, whether it's Cosmic Shambles, Book Shambles, any of those things, that is how we source money to make the stuff that we do. And also remember the Royal Albert Hall as well, which hopefully will still be standing and still able and open when we come back next year to put on whatever next year's show will be. Helen, what other charities have I forgotten?
So the 3 marine charities that we're supporting are Bite Back, that Steve Backshall was talking about, Surfers Against Sewage, and Oceana, which Cobie Smulders is a patron of. So, but really, so support the ocean charities. But I really hope that this has just, reminded you that even though we're all still mostly inside, the oceans are still there, and they're such a critical part of our history and our culture, the physical nature of our planet. So go out, find out about the oceans, get yourself a toy octopus, because everybody needs a toy octopus, and carry the ocean with you, because it is a part. We are ocean people. This is a blue planet. We all should carry it with us, and we should think about it more. So the octopus is telling you, carry the ocean with you.
Brian is looking at that with envious eyes at this very moment. And also, happy birthday to someone we work with a lot, Lucy Green, who does whose last book about the summer is fantastic. You will have seen on Sky at night. It's her birthday tonight, so happy birthday, Lucy Green. Just in case one of my nieces is still watching, hello, Stacey, as well. And well done to Francesca, who is my niece, who is also a nurse. And we're going to end tonight with, I mentioned British Sea Power, and you've seen them twice already. And Trent has also put together a film to accompany this final part. So this has been made by Trent Burton, who I keep thanking, but he deserves all the thanks that we give him, because he puts so much into all of these projects. And British Sea Power, a lot of the stuff they've been playing is from an incredible piece of work that they were involved in called From the Sea to the Land Beyond, which I think you can pick up from the BFI. But this piece of work was made by Trent Burton, and here is British Sea Power. Enjoy the rest of your evening. My laptop has 4% battery. Well done. It has made it through the whole evening. Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you, everyone else. Good night.
Silent, vast, mystic, unreal. The helmet and boots are too heavy. Get out of them! Get out of there! man, make him see! Oh, strange indeed are the wonders of the ocean floor. Merciful powers, what's this eerie shape? Look out, octopus! The crawling, irresistible, slimy, death-dealing monster of the seafloor. Oh, well, let's call this fella names, too. He deserves to be sworn at. You old cephalopod, that's you. Octopus punctatus, accent on the punk.